My son told me my wife no longer recognized my face. For 4 years, I paid $40,000 every quarter because of that sentence. Then my granddaughter mailed me a crossword puzzle for my 67th birthday, and clue number 7 was not a clue at all. It was written in my wife's handwriting. I remember everything. Stop paying, Connor. Come before noon. I read it 3 times, standing at my kitchen counter with the birthday envelope still open in my hand and the coffee going cold beside me. You need to understand something before I tell you the rest. My wife's handwriting was not the kind you forget. Judith wrote like she had somewhere more important to be than the page. Fast slant, hard pressure, long tails on the Y's, capital J like she was half annoyed the alphabet required extra ceremony. I had seen that hand on grocery lists, tax folders, Christmas cards, notes left by the sugar jar, and one very memorable legal pad page in 1998 that began with, Martin Hale, if you buy another boat before we fix the roof, I will bury you in it. So when I tell you that I knew the second I saw those words, I mean I knew. Not maybe, not probably, not it looks similar. I knew. Judith had written to me, and if Judith had written to me, then the story I had been living inside for the last 4 years was not just wrong, it was arranged. If you've ever been conned by somebody you loved, you know the first sensation is not anger, it is rearrangement. The room stays where it is, the sink is still the sink, the refrigerator is still humming. The gulls are still screaming outside because gulls have no respect for private collapse, but your whole understanding of the last several years shifts 3 inches to the left, and suddenly nothing lines up anymore. That was what happened to me. I sat down, then stood up again because sitting felt weak. Then sat down again because my knees had started doing the kind of trembling that belongs to bad phone calls and courthouse hallways. The crossword lay on my table between my hand and the coffee mug. Emma, my granddaughter, had mailed it from boarding school in Vermont. She did crosswords with Judith every summer since she was 9. Not easy ones either. Judith thought age-appropriate was what people said when they had low standards. The puzzle itself was normal enough at first glance. Blue ink, Emma's round handwriting in the clues, a little birthday note at the top. Happy birthday, Grandpa. Don't complain about the Saturday clues. Grandma would say they build character. That line alone almost got me. Judith had said exactly that to me for years because I hated crosswords that treated trivia like a blood sport. Then there was clue 7. No number box, no across or down label, just that slanted urgent line written in black pen across the margin. I remember everything. Stop paying, Connor. Come before noon. There are moments when your body knows something before your mind catches up. My chest went cold first, then my stomach. Then I looked at the clock on the microwave and saw it was 11:08. Come before noon. Not someday, not when convenient, not call me, not ask questions. Come. So I grabbed the puzzle, my truck keys, the file folder I had sworn for 4 years I no longer needed, and drove 42 minutes north to Harbor Trace Memory Residence without stopping once, unless you count the red light I rolled through so slowly it became morally negotiable. If this story teaches you anything, let it teach you this. Any place that charges you $40,000 every quarter to keep somebody from their family should at least have decent coffee in the lobby. Harbor Trace never did. The lobby smelled like lemon polish, wilted hydrangeas, and expensive reassurance. Beige walls, soft lamps, one of those fireplaces that was always on even in spring because someone had decided flames looked therapeutic if you charged enough for them. At the front desk sat a woman named Denise, who had been telling me in various soothing tones for nearly 4 years that Judith's recovery remained delicate, non-linear, and highly sensitive to emotionally loaded familiarity. That was the phrase she liked. Emotionally loaded familiarity. If you think that means husband, you would be correct. According to Harbor Trace, I was too familiar for my own wife's healing. At first I believed that because grief makes fools out of decent men, and I had already been one of the better fools in the county by then. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Judith before I tell you how they buried her under polite language and invoices. Judith Hale had the kind of intelligence that embarrassed lazy people. She was not loud about it, did not perform it, did not sit around quoting books to make dinner guests feel provincial. She just saw through nonsense faster than most people could dress it up. When I met her, she was 23, sitting on a fuel dock in a white blouse she had no business wearing near Diesel, balancing a ledger on her knee and arguing with my father over whether his cash flow system counted as a system or an illness. I fell in love with her in about 14 minutes. She married me anyway. For 39 years, Judith was the spine of our life. I ran Hale Marina. She made sure Hail Marina existed on paper in a way the tax office could tolerate. I handled boats, fuel pumps, insurance headaches, broken lifts, bait inventory, tourists who thought full service meant emotional validation. Judith handled the books, leases, payroll, harbor permits, insurance renewals, and every other dull important thing men like me like to call paperwork, until the paperwork becomes the difference between a business and a memory. We had one son, Connor. When he was little, he shadowed me around the dock in a red life vest so oversized he looked like an inflatable guilt trip. He was a good kid. That matters, not because it excuses anything, because it makes what came later harder to tell without sounding like I missed obvious warning signs from the crib forward. I didn't. Connor was good with people in a way Judith and I were not. He could remember names, shake hands without looking like he was taking a loyalty oath, and talk a rich stranger into believing a rusting bulkhead was part of the harbor's authentic character. He had charm. Judith said charm was just salesmanship with nicer shoes. She was not completely wrong. Still, he worked hard. He learned the marina from the bottom up. Fuel first, then rentals, then seasonal slips, then repair scheduling. By 30, he was running summer operations with enough competence that I started thinking maybe the place would be safe with him one day. That was before Brianna. I should be fair. Brianna did not arrive wearing a cape made of red flags. She arrived looking polished, generous, and deeply interested in expanding family legacy assets, which is the kind of phrase that should make any sane person back slowly toward the nearest exit. She had worked in boutique real estate development in Annapolis. Good clothes, better teeth. Always smelled faintly of expensive citrus and expensive plans. The first time Judith met her, she waited until after dinner, until the dishes were done and the kitchen was ours again, and said, "That woman looks at the marina the way a wolf looks at a fenced goat." I told her she was being dramatic. 3 years later, I would hear that exact sentence in my sleep. Brianna did what smart opportunists always do first. She learned the language of our pride. She never called the marina old. She called it underleveraged. Never said small, said exclusive. Never said bait shop, said retail footprint. Never said people come here to fish and drink bad coffee, said destination traffic. Connor started picking up her vocabulary the way kids come home from college with new opinions about olive oil and labor history. Then came the proposals. Boutique redevelopment, expanded event revenue, luxury docominiums, which I hate as a word and as a concept, waterfront cottages, corporate retreats, seasonal chef residency, elevating the brand, which to this day sounds like a disease to me. Judith listened to every presentation with the expression of a woman politely attending her own kidnapping. She was not against growth. That is the thing outsiders always get wrong about practical people. They assume we fear change because we prefer what we know. Judith did not fear change. She feared idiots with spreadsheets who thought the world began the moment they named a revenue stream. She knew what the marina was. It was boats, yes. Fuel, yes. Dock rent, yes. But it was also 3 generations of working water. Crabbers who paid late but always paid. Widowers who came every Thursday just to untangle lines and talk about weather. Kids who learned to bait hooks here before they learned to shave. Charter captains with divorce paperwork in the glove box and diesel in their hair. Storm nights, freeze warnings, summer madness, winter repairs. You don't turn that into a luxury brochure without killing the thing that feeds the brochure. Judith knew it. I knew it. Connor acted like he knew it, until money started glowing around the edges of his thinking. Then, 8 days before everything changed, Judith found something. I did not know that at the time, not fully. I only knew she had become quieter around Connor's office and meaner around the marina books, which for Judith was the equivalent of church bells and thunder. One night in late September, she was at the kitchen table with a yellow notepad, 3 bank printouts, and the expression she reserved for tax auditors and men who explained my own business to me. "What?" I asked. She did not look up. "Either I'm tired," she said, "or your son has decided signatures are decorative." That got my attention. She slid one paper across the table. It was a vendor transfer authorization for a deposit related to shoreline engineering review. Large number, bigger than anything I remembered approving. My signature at the bottom looked close enough to mine to pass a glance. Maybe even a second glance if you were distracted. Judith was not distracted. "That's not mine," I said. "I know." "Connor?" She tapped the page. "Or somebody who has spent too much time watching you sign invoices while talking on the phone." I sat down. "Talk to him tomorrow." "No," she said. "Why not?" "Because the first rule with smart people doing dumb things is you don't confront until you know how far the dumb thing goes." That was Judith. never dramatic when precision could do more damage. The next day, she pulled every marina transfer over $12,000 for 18 months. That evening, she found 2 more documents with questionable signatures and 3 consulting payments routed through a company neither of us recognized. Blue Water Lifestyle Holdings. Sounds like fraud in a linen shirt, if you ask me. Judith circled the name 3 times. "Who owns that?" I asked. She looked at me over her glasses. "If I'm lucky, nobody we know." She was not lucky. Neither was I. 2 days later, we were supposed to attend the Harbor Lights Regatta fundraiser, one of those town events where rich men pretend they like oysters and everybody thanks sponsors who would rather be somewhere with doors. Judith nearly skipped it because she wanted another night with the books, but Brianna had organized the donor table placements and made such a performance about family presence that Judith finally said, "Fine, let us go clap politely for people with monogrammed insanity." That was the last normal night of my life. The regatta tent was all white canvas and string lights and blue cocktails named after winds no one in Maryland has ever felt. Connor moved through it like he belonged in glossy magazines. Brianna was on his arm, all bright smile and soft control, introducing people, touching elbows, steering conversations, folding herself into the future she liked to imagine. Judith sat beside me at table 12 with one heel already off under the cloth and a look on her face that said, if one more man used the phrase waterfront activation in her hearing, somebody was going home in an ambulance. Halfway through the mayor's speech, she leaned toward me and said quietly, "Do not say anything tonight." "About what?" "About Connor. I need one more day." "What did you find?" "Enough to ruin dessert." That was the last full sentence she said to me before she collapsed. At first I thought she had merely gone pale from standing too fast. Then the water glass slipped from her hand and shattered under the table. Then her mouth tried to form something and didn't. Then her chair tipped, and I heard someone across the tent scream my wife's name before I realized the voice was mine. What followed is the usual blur people talk about, because blur is easier than sequence. Paramedics, paper napkins, Brianna crying into one hand while her other hand was already on Connor's back like she was steering him toward the correct expression. Sirens, hospital lights, forms, questions. The emergency physician said Judith had suffered a severe neurovascular episode, possibly ischemic, complicated by confusion and medication interaction. Then came a neurologist recommended by the hospital board because of course he did. Dr. Victor Sloan. If you have never met a man who can ruin a family with good posture, then you have not met Dr. Victor Sloan. He was in his early 50s, silver at the temples, voice so measured it sounded pre-approved. The kind of expensive calm that makes frightened people feel uncivilized for panicking. He spoke to me in a consultation room at 2:10 in the morning, while I still had Judith's broken water glass in my head and someone else's blood pressure cuff marks on my forearm. He said Judith's imaging showed no devastating stroke, which sounded like good news until he followed it with a long explanation about transient vascular injury, executive function instability, emotional fixation, face recognition disturbance, and the possibility of aggravating loops triggered by high-intensity family contact during the recovery window. If that sounds like a lot of words doing suspiciously little actual work, congratulations. You are smarter at 2:10 in the morning than I was. I heard hopeful things first. No catastrophic damage, potential for stabilization, good chance of managed recovery with specialized oversight. I also heard terrifying things, episodes, confusion, misrecognition, disorientation, agitation, risk of regression. Then he said the sentence that built the cage. The people she loves most may be the hardest for her to process correctly in the short term. He said it softly, almost kindly. And just like that, the idea that my own face could hurt Judith took root in my chest. Connor was there for all of it. Quiet, pale, perfectly pitched somewhere between devastated son and competent next of kin. Brianna held my coffee, found my reading glasses, touched my shoulder at just the right moments, cried exactly enough. I did not know then that some people understand the optics of compassion better than the feeling itself. Judith stayed in the hospital 5 days. The first time I saw her after the collapse, she looked at me, frowned like a woman trying to read a menu in dim light, and said, "You have Martin's coat." My name is Martin, not was, is. When your wife looks at you and places you one person to the side of yourself, it does something ugly to the floor under your feet. I said, "Jude, it's me." Her eyes darted to Connor, then to Brianna, then back to me. She became upset. Not violent, not wild. Just frightened in a way Judith had never been frightened a day in her life. Dr. Sloan later called it recognition distress. I called it a knife. From there, things moved too quickly. That is another way bad people win. They move while good people are still adjusting to disaster. Connor said he could help coordinate. Brianna said she had a contact at a premium neurocognitive recovery residence outside St. Michael's. Dr. Sloan said the first 90 days would be crucial, and the wrong home environment could harden Judith's confusion into a longer-term pattern. I had a mild cardiac event in the same week because apparently my body likes timing. Nothing fatal, just enough chest pain and hospital monitoring to make me physically absent while the next set of papers came across the table. Temporary medical oversight, transfer authorization, specialized residential placement, financial responsibility until insurance review, limited contact period during adjustment. I signed enough to haunt myself and not enough to understand what I was signing. By the time I got my head above water, Judith had been moved to Harbor Trace. At first I visited twice a week, then once a week. Then not at all. Not because I stopped wanting to, because every visit went the same way. Judith would be drowsy, or turned away, or mid-episode, or suddenly unable to tolerate extended conversation. Once she called me Mr. Hale in a tone so formal I nearly vomited in the parking lot. Another time she stared through me and asked whether the gulls were always this rude in Connecticut. We were not in Connecticut. Dr. Sloan said misplacement and symbolic substitution were common in patients under complex cognitive strain. Denise at Harbor Trace said progress required consistency and low pressure. Connor said, "Dad, I know this is killing you, but every time you go in there, she spirals afterward." He said that with tears in his eyes. You tell me what a father is supposed to do with tears in his son's eyes while his wife is forgetting his name. So I stepped back, because I thought stepping back was love. That is one of the harder things to live with. Not that they lied, that they got me to participate in the lie by calling it devotion. The bills started at $15,000 a month, then climbed fast. Customized memory support, neurobehavioral monitoring, private suite surcharge, medication review, specialized cognitive occupational therapy, protective staffing, executive functioning stabilization program. Those last 4 words alone should have sent me to war. Instead, I refinanced a note on the winter storage building and paid. When insurance stalled, Connor said he and Brianna were covering what they could. Maybe they were for the first month. Maybe not. By the second quarter, Harbor Trace wanted a cleaner arrangement. Quarterly wire transfers, less administrative disruption, better continuity of care, $40,000 every quarter. The exact amount changed once, then changed back. That should have bothered me. Lots of things should have bothered me. But there is an exhaustion that comes from grieving somebody who is still alive. It is not widowhood, not caregiving, not ordinary fear. It is a suspension. You are told the person exists, told they may improve, told you matter, told your presence is risky, told patience is love, told money is medicine, told hope needs quiet. So you become the kind of man who wires $40,000 every quarter and thanks his son for carrying the burden he should have questioned. 4 years passed like that. Judith disappeared by invoice. Connor grew more polished. Brianna more involved. Harbor Trace sent update summaries dense with words and light on facts. Judith demonstrated resistance to emotionally loaded family memory cues today, but tolerated structured environmental anchoring. That is a real sentence from a real report I paid real money to receive. What did it mean? Absolutely nothing you could take to court. Everything you could use to keep a husband waiting. The marina changed too. Connor pushed harder on redevelopment. Consultants appeared, site surveys, preliminary investor dinners. A hospitality group from D.C. toured our southern slips in Italian loafers. Every time I objected, Connor softened his voice and said, "Dad, this is exactly why Mom wanted us thinking long-term." He used Judith that way more and more as time passed. Not her opinion, her ghost. Judith would have wanted growth. Judith knew the marina couldn't stay frozen forever. Judith didn't want me doing this alone. Maybe grief makes fools out of decent men. Hope makes accountants out of wolves. Then Emma mailed me the crossword. Emma was 12 by then, tall for her age, narrow-faced like Judith, with the unfortunate family trait of seeing too much and reporting it with interest. Connor and Brianna had sent her to St. Agnes Boarding Academy the previous fall for structure and opportunity. That phrase also deserves jail time, if you ask me. Judith adored Emma. They did the Saturday puzzle together every summer at my kitchen table, arguing over clues, eating cantaloupe, and insulting constructors they considered lazy. When Emma went to boarding school, Harbor Trace allowed one supervised family activity packet a month. Connor called it therapeutic continuity. Brianna called it meaningful engagement. Judith had apparently continued helping with crosswords, apparently. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, my birthday. No call from Connor until 2 that afternoon. No visit from Brianna. No Harbor Trace update, just the puzzle. And in the margin, Judith's hand. I remember everything. Stop paying Connor. Come before noon. When Denise saw me in the Harbor Trace lobby that morning, she blinked twice. That matters. People who expect you do not blink like that. Mr. Hale, she said too quickly. We weren't told you were coming. You are now. Her smile stayed at desk height. Judith's morning has been somewhat unsettled. I came before noon. That made her eyes move. Just once. Sharp little flick to my hand. The crossword. Then back to me. I'm sorry? I stepped closer. My wife told me to come before noon. Denise opened her mouth, closed it, then said the most bureaucratic sentence I have ever heard outside a city planning meeting. There may have been an unsanctioned communication exchange through family activity materials. That is when I knew two things at once. First, Judith had found a way around them. Second, they were already afraid of paper. I said, take me to her. Denise hesitated long enough for me to see the whole machine in her face. Delay, reframe, call upstairs, prepare the room, maybe medicate, maybe remove something, maybe move somebody. So I did something Judith had been begging me to do for years in every area of life except this one. I became difficult. No calls, I said. No check-ins. No one goes upstairs before me. If I see one more person touch a phone before I see my wife, I'm calling the sheriff and the state licensing board before your next sentence is finished. I do not usually sound like that. That is one of the benefits of finally understanding you've been handled. You stop worrying about appearing impolite to the people doing the handling. Denise stiffened, then softened, then tried concern. Mr. Hale, if you escalate emotionally, it could be very dysregulating for Judith. She can be as regulated as she likes once I am in the room. I do not know whether it was the crossword in my hand or the fact I said sheriff in a building that clearly preferred words like de-escalation, but Denise stood up. Please wait here. I'm coming with you. Her jaw moved once. Then she walked. Harbor Trace was one of those places built to look less like a medical facility and more like expensive surrender. Framed sailboat watercolors, carpet thick enough to muffle dissent, long windows over marsh grass, private sitting nooks with chessboards nobody used. Everything designed to make a family feel they had chosen care and not exile. Judith's room was in the Willow Wing, room 12. Of course it was room 12. Emma had circled the number in the crossword after clue 7. I had not even registered it until I was halfway up the stairs. When Denise opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the light. Judith loved morning light. Always had. She would pull every blind in the house by 7, like a woman personally accountable for sunrise. In room 12, the shades were half drawn even though the view faced open water. The second thing I noticed was that Judith was awake, not half asleep, not medicated into softness, awake. She was sitting in a chair by the window with a cardigan over her shoulders and a pencil in her hand. A pencil. For 4 years they had told me fine motor strain triggered fatigue. Yet there she sat holding a pencil like Judith had always held pencils, too hard and like it offended her that wood could splinter. She looked up when I entered. Not confused, not frightened. Furious. Close the door, she said. That was my wife. I closed the door so fast I nearly took the trim with it. Denise started to speak. Judith turned her head and said, If you stay in this room another second, I am going to tell my husband exactly where Dr. Sloan keeps the extra signatures. Denise left. I stood there staring at Judith as if language had become an optional service. She looked older. Of course she did. Thinner, too. A little sunken under the eyes. But Judith had always worn age like tailored clothing. What stunned me was not how changed she was. It was how much of her was still there. She held out her hand. Martin, she said, come here before they fix this. And I went. I dropped to my knees beside her chair like a man arriving late to his own life. My hands shook when I touched hers. She was warm, dry, real. Jude, I said, which is all I could manage because the other 1,000 things in my throat were trying to come out at once and none of them fit through the same opening. She squeezed once. I know, she said. We do not have time for all of it first. If that does not sound romantic, then you did not know Judith. Urgency was her most intimate form of honesty. I said, you know me. She gave me a look so sharp it almost steadied me. For God's sake, Martin, I know your face, your bad shoulder, your ugly watch, and the fact you still think that windbreaker qualifies as formal outerwear. That was the moment I almost lost myself completely. Not in grief, in relief. Huge, stupid, blinding relief. My wife knew me. She had known me the whole time, and I had been paying my son $40,000 every quarter because he said she didn't. I wish I could tell you the next hour unfolded with clarity and dignity. It did not. It unfolded like every starving feeling in my body had been told food still existed. I laughed once, then cried, then got angry that I was crying because Judith hated when emotion got sloppy before information. Then I tried to ask 6 questions in one sentence. Then she said, "Martin, if you keep doing that, I will die irritated and then haunt you usefully." That got me under control faster than therapy might have. I sat on the floor beside her chair like a schoolboy hauled into order. "Tell me what's happening." She looked toward the door first, then toward the hallway, then back at me. "They medicate me heavier after lunch." "How heavy?" "Enough that by visiting hours I am slower, foggier, and easier to narrate around." My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. "Who?" "Connor knows, Brianna knows, Victor definitely knows." She never called him Dr. Sloan. Not once. Men lose titles fast with Judith when they earn it. Why? That took longer. Not because she did not know, because she had to decide where to begin. The short version or the one that ruins your blood pressure? "Start ruining," she nodded once. "Connor has been siphoning money out of the marina for years. Not huge amounts at first. Consulting fees, environmental review retainers, deposit movements, investor courting expenses. Enough to call it planning if nobody checked too closely." She angled her head toward the desk. I checked. I looked at the pencil in her hand. "Before the regatta?" "Yes." How far had it gone? Far enough that he'd already tied himself to Brianna's development people. Far enough that the South Yard appraisal had been inflated through a friendly chain. Far enough that if I had brought the book straight to you, you would have broken his face before I could finish my sentence. She was not wrong. "So what did you do?" "I called Vera." Of course she had. Vera Quinn had been Judith's friend since college, and mine since I was arrogant enough to think law school had made her humorless. Vera practiced trust and estate litigation in Easton for 30 years before retiring into the kind of sharpness retirement never actually dulls. "You told Vera before me?" Judith gave me a look. "Yes, because Vera does not solve fraud with a socket wrench." Again, not wrong. "What did she say?" "That I needed copies of everything before we confronted Connor. That if investor money had started crossing family authority lines, the books alone would not be the whole story." Judith leaned back carefully. "I was supposed to meet her the morning after the regatta. And then you collapsed." "I did not just collapse." That sentence came flat, hard, different. I looked at her. She lowered her voice even more. "I drank something Brianna handed me 15 minutes before the speeches. For a second I heard nothing. Not the vents, not the gulls, not the hallway cart rolling past the door. Nothing." "You think she drugged you?" "I think I was alert enough to count donor envelopes and furious enough to mentally dismember 3 redevelopment proposals." She tapped the arm of the chair. "Then Brianna gave me sparkling water with lime and told me I looked pale. 20 minutes later, I couldn't feel the left side of my mouth properly." The room changed temperature. "You're sure?" "No." Judith's mouth tightened. "I am sure of this. The tests afterward did not match the story I kept being told. Victor said vascular confusion, then medication interaction, then stress response, then post-event cognitive instability. Every time the language shifted, the control stayed the same." I gripped the side of her chair. "Why didn't you tell me?" She laughed once, not kindly. "When?" "During the supervised visits where they scheduled me after sedation. In the 2-minute calls where Connor sat just off camera breathing like a probation officer. In the handwritten notes they filtered. Or the 1 week Victor convinced them I was emotionally overload sensitive to spousal recognition." She looked straight at me. "Martin, they did not stop me from speaking because I had nothing to say. They stopped me because I did." That is the kind of sentence that rearranges a marriage backward. Every delayed instinct. Every moment I almost pushed harder and then didn't. Every time I chose patience because someone in Scrubs told me patience was love. I said, "The crossword." A tiny smile touched her mouth. "Emma, how?" She visited on Family Learning Day with Brianna at the end of spring term. They had me in the art room because before noon I am clearest, and they like to show me off in the morning as long as I stay agreeable. Judith's eyes sharpened. Emma looked at me once and knew something was wrong. Of course she had. Emma inherited the women in my family the way some boys inherit bad knees. She brought the Saturday puzzle book. Brianna took a phone call outside. The aide was helping someone else in the corridor. I told Emma to keep making mistakes out loud and listen very carefully. Judith held up the pencil. "I wrote in the margins of the page she knew you'd actually look at." I stared at that pencil so hard it blurred. "My God." "Yes," Judith said. That was roughly my reaction too, though more directed. I had 100 more questions, all of them ugly. Why Harbor Trace? Why 4 years? Why didn't you run? Why hasn't anyone else seen? Why noon? I asked the wrong one first. Why are you still here? The anger drained out of her face and left something worse behind. Calculation worn down by time, because Connor and Victor built 3 cages, not 1. She began counting on her fingers. Medication, 1 finger. Paper, 2. Fear, 3. They sedated me enough to make me look worse when it suited them. They documented every objection as agitation, every contradiction as confabulation, every insistence as fixation. And they kept telling me if I fought too hard too fast, Connor would say you were no longer safe around me, the marina's financing would freeze mid-review, and Emma would be taken out of school and put entirely under Brianna's family because of instability. I stared at her. That makes no sense. Martin, she said softly, it did not have to make sense. It had to be expensive enough emotionally that I could not test every wall at once. There it was again. Judith seeing the mechanism before the label. I took a breath. Do you have proof? Yes and no. Explain. Some is here. Some was taken. Some exists only in my memory because Victor underestimated how well I remember numbers when I am angry. That almost made me smile. Almost. She pointed to the desk. Second drawer, the false bottom insert. I stood up, crossed to the desk, and slid open the drawer. Writing pads, socks, unsigned holiday cards, a cheap packet of tissues, nothing else. Tap the right side. I did. Hollow sound. The insert lifted. Beneath it sat a folded medication sheet, 3 photocopied ledger pages, and a yellow note card. I carried them back like church relics. Judith took the medication sheet first. Look at the timing. There were 3 names I could barely pronounce, and 2 I recognized. 1 anti-anxiety medication, 1 sedative, 1 antipsychotic used, according to the typed note, for intermittent behavioral dysregulation. Behavioral dysregulation. I said, Judith, you have never been psychotic a day in your life. No, she replied, but I have been inconvenient. The doses told the story even before she explained it. Lower in the morning, higher afternoon. Peak sedation aligned perfectly with visiting blocks and family calls. My stomach turned. The ledger copies came next. They were marina transfer records, real ones, not the cleaned-up summaries Connor had shown me over the past 2 years when I occasionally pushed back on project spending. These showed consulting payments routed through Blue Water Lifestyle Holdings, then mirrored through Harbor Planning deposits, then reclassified as capital improvement prep. You see the second signature field? Judith asked. I did. Connor Hale, managing operations. Judith Hale, administrative authorization. Martin Hale, owner approval. All 3, 2 real, 1 not. Mine. Then the note card. On it, Judith had written in small, furious script 4 items. South Yard appraisal inflated. Blue Water tied to Brianna's brother. Victor on Harbor Trace board through silent share. Conservatorship petition draft. Check County filing November year 1. I looked up so fast the room tilted. Conservatorship? Temporary emergency filing after your cardiac episode, she said. I saw my name on a draft packet in Victor's office during a family review they thought I was too medicated to understand. What happened to it? It was never fully converted because they didn't need to. They discovered they could run almost the same system by combining medical authority, payment dependency, and your trust in Connor. I sat back down hard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The 4 years between us felt obscene, not in the abstract, in detail. Every invoice, every phone call, every Christmas bouquet. Harbor Trace helped Connor send from Judith. Every softly worded update about progress plateaus, every time I had thanked my son for carrying so much. Judith watched me go through it. Then she said quieter, You need to listen to me carefully now. I did. You cannot explode in this building. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to put my fist through Harbor Trace's tasteful lamp. You think. I know. Victor survives explosions. Men like him are built for panicked accusations. Connor will cry, Brianna will look wounded, Denise will say you destabilized a resident. The chart will grow another page by dinner. Then they will move me, seal the records, and spend a year teaching a judge that grief made you paranoid. That was exactly right. I hated how exactly right it was. What do? You leave here like a man still trying to understand. You thank Denise for helping. You tell Connor later that I seemed tired but settled. You wire nothing. Sign nothing. Call Vera before you even start your truck. Her hand tightened on mine. And Martin, what? Do not tell Emma she did anything brave until this is finished. I do not want bravery to become something adults praise right before children start paying for it. That sentence alone could have carried 4 years of fear inside it. I nodded. I won't. She looked at the crossword on my knee. Keep that puzzle. I plan to. When this is over, frame it. I swallowed hard. When this is over, I'm framing the wall. That got the first real smile I had seen on her face in years. There you are, she said. There I was. Too late, maybe. But there. We had 11 minutes before noon. At 11:49, Denise knocked and opened the door halfway without waiting for permission. Her smile was cautious now, rehearsed around uncertainty. "How are we doing?" Judith sagged almost imperceptibly into the role she had clearly been forced to practice 100 times. Not confusion exactly. Fatigue, mild softness, reduced speed. It was the most terrible performance I have ever seen because it was excellent. "I'm tired," she said. Denise stepped in. "Maybe we've had enough stimulation for this morning?" I nearly lunged across the room at the word stimulation. Instead, I stood, adjusted my windbreaker like a man whose only complaint was upholstery, and said, "She looked better than I expected." Denise studied me. That mattered. She was checking for rupture. She did not see one. "We've had some steadier mornings lately," she said, "though afternoons remain a bit more variable." Afternoons. Of course they did. I touched Judith's shoulder once. "I'll be back." Her eyes met mine for one fraction of a second. "Thank you for the puzzle," she said. To Denise, it sounded ordinary. To me, it sounded like a lit fuse. In the hallway, I made myself walk at the pace of a man who still believed in laminated brochures. Every instinct I had wanted speed, confrontation, fire. Judith wanted sequence, so sequence got the wheel. At the front desk, I thanked Denise for making room for an unscheduled visit. She looked relieved by the blandness. Then I said, casually enough to make myself sick, "Connor mentioned the quarterly payment window may need to move up this year. I'd like a cleaner breakdown from Harbor Trace first. Nothing personal, just for my records." Denise's hand paused on the keyboard. "Of course. Itemized if possible. We can request that." Request. I smiled the same way men smile at salesmen while counting their fingers afterward. "That would be great." By the time I got to the parking lot, my knees were weak. I sat in my truck with both hands on the wheel and did not start it for a full minute because starting it meant moving and moving meant the next part had begun. Vera answered on the second ring. "Martin," she said, "if this is about your birthday, I sent the card yesterday. Judith wrote to me." Silence. "Then where are you?" "Harbor Trace parking lot." "Is she lucid?" "Yes." "Can you get here in under an hour?" "Yes." "Good. Bring every paper you've ever been stupid enough to keep and every paper you were smart enough to hide. And Martin." "What?" "If you are about to do something cinematic, delay the movie. We need a case." I drove straight to Vera's office. Retirement, in Vera's case, meant she no longer billed by the hour but still maintained the office because apparently having no place to terrify documents felt wasteful. She had reduced staff, reduced caseload, and absolutely not reduced velocity. When I walked in carrying Judith's note card, the medication sheet, the copied ledgers, and the crossword like a man smuggling oxygen, Vera took one look at my face and shut the door without a word. Her office smelled like old paper, black coffee, and contempt for sloppy thinking. I put everything on her desk. She read the crossword first, then the note card, then the medication sheet, then the ledger copies. Then she sat back, removed her glasses, and said, "Well, that single word held about 3,000 billable opinions." "You knew," I said. "No," she replied. "I feared." "Difference? Yes. Fear is what responsible people feel when they don't yet have proof." She picked up the note card again. Judith always did know how to write a grenade in 4 bullets. For the next 3 hours, Vera did what Vera had always done best. She turned my panic into a list. County filing search for any emergency conservatorship or draft petition. Corporate registration search on Blue Water Lifestyle Holdings. Property interest disclosures tied to Harbor Trace board structure. Medical record demand. Financial tracing through Marina accounts. Independent neuropharmacology review. Immediate freeze on any voluntary payment acceleration. No direct accusation to Connor. No confrontation with Brianna. No improvised righteousness. She underlined the last item twice. Then she leaned back and asked, "How much have you paid total?" I told her. She did not visibly react, which is how you know a lawyer is furious. "Quarterly? Every quarter?" "Yes. Direct to Harbor Trace? Usually. Sometimes through Connor first in the early months because he said administrative timing got messy." Vera closed her eyes for 1 second. "Dear God." "What?" "That means we are not just looking at coercive medical control. We are very likely looking at commingling, routing, and maybe fraudulent dependency creation," I said. "Speak regular human," she obliged. "It means your son may have turned your wife's captivity into a revenue model. There are sentences a man hears that become permanent interior architecture. That was one." Vera made a call, then another, then 3 more in a row to people she identified only as useful when institutions become decorative. By 4 in the afternoon, she had the first answer. Blue Water Lifestyle Holdings was real, registered through Delaware, because naturally it was. Beneficial ownership obscured, but not well enough for Vera's tastes. Local operational contact tied to a consulting mailbox in Easton. Secondary linked entity connected to Brianna's brother, Nathan Kessler. Judith had been right on line 2 of her note card. Vera looked at me. Your daughter-in-law's family has their hand in this. I stood up, then sat back down because standing was starting to feel too much like homicide. What about Harbor Trace? That one takes longer. It always takes longer when rich people put abuse in nice buildings. Vera gave me a tired, approving look. You finally sound like Judith again. That almost undid me. By 6 in the evening, she had one more result. The county filing Judith remembered did exist. Not a finalized conservatorship. A draft emergency capacity motion from November of year 1, prepared but never fully adjudicated after Dr. Sloan's clinical recommendation shifted toward structured private residential care under cooperative family oversight. In plain English, they had tested one route to legal control, then found a softer route worked better. Vera tapped the filing printout. They do not need a formal cage if everyone behaves as if the door is already locked. I drove home at dusk with copies of everything in a folder on the passenger seat and Judith's crossword on top where I could see it at every red light. Connor called at 7:14, too soon. That told me something by itself. Hey, Dad, he said, voice easy, almost casual. Denise mentioned you stopped by this morning. Of course she had. Was in the area. How'd Mom seem? I looked at the crossword, then at the darkening harbor beyond my kitchen window. Tired, I said. A little better than last time. He exhaled, relieved in a way that made my skin crawl. That's good. That's really good. Victor thinks they may be stabilizing some of the afternoon behaviors. Afternoon behaviors. I said, I asked Denise for a cleaner cost breakdown before I move the next wire. A pause. Tiny, there and gone, but there. Oh, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. It did not sound like that made sense to him. It sounded like that complicated something. I just want the paperwork straighter, I said. Totally. He laughed lightly. Too lightly. Then, actually, that timing works out. Brianna and I were going to talk to you anyway because Harbor Trace may recommend moving the quarter deposit earlier this cycle. They're restructuring staffing for Mom's care tier. Care tier. Send me the paperwork. Another little pause. I can get it from Victor. No, I said, and put just enough age into my voice to sound stubborn rather than alert. Get it from Harbor Trace. He recovered fast. Sure, of course. I'll see what Denise can send. When I hung up, I wrote down the time, his wording, and the length of the pauses. That is the thing about once you stop being prey. You start noticing timing. At 8, Vera emailed one line. Do not let them accelerate you into anything before we pull the financial spine. At 8:07, Emma called. I almost didn't answer because I was not sure my voice could handle a child. Then I remembered Judith's instruction. Do not tell Emma she did anything brave until this is finished. I picked up. Hey, birthday criminal, Emma said. Did you hate the Saturday clues? I looked at the crossword in my hand. No, I said slowly. I thought clue 7 was excellent. Silence on her end, then a breath. Good, not more, not less. That was Judith's granddaughter all over. I asked about school. She complained about chapel. We discussed cafeteria lasagna with the seriousness it deserved. I told her I loved her. She said she knew and hung up. Children learn to talk around danger the way sailors learn to read weather. Fast or not at all. That night I did not sleep much. Every hour I found a new memory to hate. Connor at 10 holding a flashlight for me on the service dock. Connor at 17 asking Judith for help balancing his first marina ledger. Connor at 29 standing beside Brianna in the kitchen, talking about opportunity density like opportunity and density had somehow produced a son. Connor crying in the hospital consultation room while Dr. Sloan talked about recognition distress. Were the tears real? Was any of it? How many times had I mistaken shock for sincerity because my own grief needed him to still be a son? At 3:20 in the morning, I got up, poured water, and looked out at the slips behind the house. The marina sat black and still except for 2 mast lights in the wind and the red blink on the fuel dock sensor. Judith loved the marina at night because it was the only time, she said, when money and weather both shut up at once. I stood there long enough to hear her voice in the kitchen behind me. Not literally, but close enough to hurt. If something is rotten, Martin, rot it all the way open. Do not scrape the surface and call it solved. So that became the plan. Not accusation, exposure, not fury, structure. I was done asking whether my son had done something terrible. The only question left was how much of the terrible had been monetized before I noticed the smell. The next morning began with 3 things arriving almost at once. An itemized billing statement from Harbor Trace that explained nothing. A voicemail from Connor pretending not to care whether I had reviewed it yet, and Vera walking into my kitchen at 9:03 with a banker's box, 2 legal pads, and a man I had never met carrying a laptop bag like it contained religious disappointment. "This," Vera said without ceremony, "is Darius Kemp. He used to trace fraud for insurers before deciding their morals were too conditional even for him." Darius was maybe 50, maybe younger. Some men get aged by fluorescent office lighting and disappointed optimism at exactly the same speed. He wore navy slacks, a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled once too neatly, and the expression of a person who had long ago stopped needing criminals to be inventive in order to despise them. He shook my hand and glanced at the billing statement Harbor Trace had emailed at 7:12. "This is decorative," he said. I liked him immediately. The statement itself ran 6 pages and somehow managed to list $40,000 worth of services without naming a single measurable thing. Cognitive stabilization block, resident integrated environmental support, adaptive behavioral continuity, specialized family trigger mitigation, dynamic medication stewardship, protective attentional redirection. I looked at Darius. Can people get arrested for phrases? Not nearly enough. He sat at my table, opened the laptop, and asked for every Marina account statement, every Harbor Trace bill, every transfer confirmation, every vendor approval Judith and I had signed in the last 5 years, and any note I had made in the past 12 hours. Why the notes? Because fraud lives in patterns and lies live in timing. If you suddenly started writing down wording, there's usually a reason. That sentence alone told me Darius had spent a lot of time with people emerging from trust. By 10 my kitchen looked like a merger between an audit and a wake. Darius built columns. Vera made calls. I kept coffee appearing like it was the only service I could still perform without endangering evidence. At 10:47, Darius found the first thing that made him whistle through his teeth. "Here," he said. He turned the screen toward us. Harbor Trace invoices paid directly from me for the first 3 quarters. Then 2 quarters routed through Connor for administrative bundling, as he had called it. Then 1 direct quarter. Then a sequence of split wires. Each time money touched Connor's account, a portion peeled off within 48 hours into either Blue Water Lifestyle Holdings or a secondary account labeled Title Hospitality Advisory. I blinked. "What's Title?" Darius typed, found it, did not look pleased. "Title Hospitality Advisory LLC, registered manager Nathan Kessler, Brianna's brother." He looked up at me. "Your son wasn't just passing money through, he was shaving it." "How much?" Darius calculated quietly. Clicked, dragged, filtered. "Known from these lines? 27,000, maybe a little more. That's just the part unsophisticated enough to leave fingerprints." Vera removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. "The part unsophisticated enough," Darius nodded. "Family thieves almost always steal twice. Once because they need it, again because they think the emotional story around the first theft makes a second one safe." I sat down without meaning to. For years I had told myself the quarterly wires at least reached Judith's care, even if the setup felt cruel. That belief, pathetic as it was, had been one of the few scraps I used to justify not blowing up my whole relationship with Connor. Now even that scrap was folding in on itself. Vera said, "Can you quantify exposure tied specifically to Harbor Trace routing versus Marina diversion?" "Not yet," Darius replied, "but I can tell you something more useful." He clicked open a different tab. "Connor has debt. That did not surprise me. The scale did. 3 lines of personal borrowing tied to development commitments. A short-term note against a speculative waterfront hospitality project, a private investor bridge agreement, 2 maxed credit instruments under Brianna's consulting entity, 1 delinquent legal fee tied to land use review, everything dated roughly within 18 months of Judith's collapse." "How bad?" I asked. Darius gave me the kind of look surgeons probably give when deciding how honest to be before lunch. Bad enough that if Judith had cut him off or exposed unauthorized transfers at the wrong moment, he could have lost investor standing, personal liquidity, and maybe his whole redevelopment play. Vera set her glasses down on the table. "Then motive isn't abstract anymore." No, it was not. Judith had not merely been inconvenient, she had become expensive. At 11:22, Vera got a return call from a former clerk in county probate. The emergency capacity motion from year 1 had not been the only filing activity. There had also been a sealed petition draft related to temporary trust administration review in the event of sustained cognitive incapacity. Trust. That word changed the room. Our family trust held the marina, the winter storage lots, the south yard easement rights, my life insurance, and the little brick rental building Judith had inherited from her mother. Not billionaire territory. Enough, However, to turn a son from impatient to predatory if he believed he was already entitled and merely waiting for age to cooperate. Who drafted it? Vera asked into the phone. Pause. Then she looked at me. Victor Sloane's office referred the medical capacity language. There are moments when coincidence stops being available as a moral theory. That was one. We had Brianna's family linked through shell entities. Connor's debt linked through development pressure. Harbor Trace money routed through his accounts. Victor's fingerprints near trust incapacity language. Judith's margin note telling me to stop paying Connor. And a dosing schedule that turned my wife into a fog machine every afternoon on command. At noon, the irony nearly choked me. Judith had told me to come before noon because after noon they medicated her into a version of herself I had been trained to mistake for truth. Right around 12:15, Connor called again. I sent the Harbor Trace breakdown. You did. Anything you want me to explain? That too mattered. He was fishing for what I knew. I let enough silence sit there to make him slightly uncomfortable. Mostly looks like language hiding numbers, I said. He laughed, forced. Yeah, they write like that. Funny thing. What? I thought Mom looked clearer this morning. Too much. I knew it the second I said it. Not fatal, but enough to shift his breathing. Clearer how? Just clearer. Another tiny pause. Victor says that can happen. Windows. Not stable, but windows. There it was. The script arriving. Maybe, I said. I'd like a full records release. This time the pause was longer. Dad, I don't know if that's the best idea while things are this delicate. I was under the impression paperwork helped. I just mean if we start pulling too hard on bureaucracy, Harbor Trace could get defensive. I smiled at the kitchen wall. Connor, if Harbor Trace gets defensive over medical records on my own wife, I will consider that a useful fact. He recovered, but not cleanly. Okay, sure. Let me talk to Victor. No. Let Harbor Trace talk to Harbor Trace. I'm making the request through counsel. The silence after counsel was the best sound I had heard all week. Then he said carefully, counsel. Yes, for records. Yes. Dad, you know there's no enemy here, right? I looked at the crossword. Then nobody should mind the paper. He hung up 40 seconds later, pretending he had another call. Vera looked pleased. Good, was it? Yes, you put law in the room before accusation. That changes how stupid people become. At 1, she filed a formal records demand and a notice preserving any trust administration documents tied to Judith's capacity status. At 1:14, Darius flagged another issue. Harbor Trace's board structure. The residence was owned by a parent entity called Coastal Serenity Holdings, which sounded like a yacht club for liars. One minority silent share position sat through a healthcare investment shell linked indirectly to Victor Sloane. I blinked. He owns part of Harbor Trace. Indirectly enough to avoid announcing it in small talk, Darius said, but yes. So every quarter, some piece of your money likely came back through an ownership structure tied to the same neurologist advising extended placement. That took a full minute to really land. Victor was not merely recommending care. He was billing into the building that housed the care and profiting from the continuation of the care while shaping the medical narrative that justified the continuation. Vera said it more cleanly. He monetized clinical authority, Darius nodded, and your son monetized filial trust. Brianna, I suspected, monetized whatever room was left. At 2:30 that afternoon, Harbor Trace called to say a records release would require up to 10 business days. Vera answered from my kitchen. No, she said. It will require until 9 tomorrow morning before I file for emergency inspection based on financial conflict, questionable dosing transparency, and evidence of communication interference. Which would you prefer? 10 seconds later, it required less time. They agreed to partial production by the following morning. Funny how cooperation improves when the right woman uses the word inspection. At 3:10, Emma called again. This time she did not bother with the crossword pretense. Did you see Grandma? Yes. Is she really there? Yes. Did she know you? I looked out over the marina while gulls fought over something morally indefensible near slip 14. She knew my worst jacket. Emma exhaled. Long, shaky. 12 going on 50. I thought maybe I imagined it. What? She looked at me in the art room and for a second she was just her. Emma swallowed audibly. Then the nurse came back with tea, and 20 minutes later she started speaking like she was underwater. I gripped the phone harder. What kind of tea? I don't know. Brown mug, nurse with silver nails. Judith had said medication after noon. Emma had seen the handoff herself. Why didn't you tell your parents? Silence. Then, because my mother said if I kept upsetting Grandma with fantasy conversations, they'd stop letting me visit. There it was again. Children trained by access. I said nothing for a second, because rage does not improve a granddaughter's breathing. Emma filled the quiet herself. I know I should have told you sooner. No, I said sharply enough that she stopped. Then softer. No, you do not get to own adult evil retroactively. Do you hear me? A sniff. Yes. Good. Keep hearing it. After I hung up, Vera wrote down Emma's exact wording. Not yet for testimony. For sequence. Everything was sequence now. That evening I did something I had not done in months. I opened Judith's old office at the marina. Connor used it sometimes now for investor calls because he liked the view from her window and had apparently never felt the irony burning his skin. Her desk sat under the chart of Chesapeake depths she always claimed was the only honest map in the building. Pencil cup, brass lamp. Calendar still turned to April because nobody with sense had touched anything after she left, except for Connor's growing pile of redevelopment folders on the credenza. I opened drawers, tax files, leases, stamped envelopes, an emergency cash tin with $43 and one old cough drop. Nothing dramatic. Then I remembered how Judith worked when she believed somebody in the room might eventually become the problem. She always kept the real version one step to the left of the obvious one, so I checked the left side of the bookshelf. Third shelf, behind the navigation manuals. Blue accordion file, no label. Inside were photocopies, so many photocopies, transfer requests, draft appraisals, environmental review proposals, a draft letter to our trust attorney. An unsigned memo Judith had written to herself, titled, If Connor Pushes Further, and one printed email thread between Brianna and Nathan Kessler. The subject line read, South Yard, phased strategy before Martin realizes Judith won't sign. My hands went numb. The email chain was 2 years old. Brianna wrote, If Victor keeps her in the cognitive lane, Connor can manage him. The real obstacle is Martin if he decides to wake up. Nathan replied, Then don't make him wake up. Keep him useful. Need him sad, not suspicious, until title control is cleaner. I sat down in Judith's desk chair so abruptly the casters squealed. Sad, not suspicious. That was me. Reduced to a management category in an email between my daughter-in-law and her brother. I kept reading. There were references to investor pacing, family optics, harbor trace continuity, premium memory narrative, and one line from Brianna that made the room disappear around me for a second. Emma must stay framed as protected from volatility. Child sympathy is a shield if this ever gets noisy. I have read a lot of unpleasant sentences in my life. That one ranked. I made copies, then copies of the copies, then photographed everything and sent duplicates to Vera, because by then paranoia had ceased being pathology and become a professional courtesy. At 8:40, Connor came into the office. He must have seen my truck. He stopped just inside the door and looked at me sitting behind Judith's desk. The expression on his face changed once, very quickly. Surprise first, then calculation, then what he believed looked like concern. Dad? Connor. He noticed the papers in stacks. Not enough to identify, enough to smell work. You okay? No. That was the truth, and truth landed oddly in his ears by then. He moved farther in. I've been meaning to ask if you wanted to sit down this week. Brianna thinks the pressure around Mom is making you retreat into the business too much. Retreat into the business. I looked at my son and thought, you people cannot say one honest thing without dressing it in concern first. I saw your mother this morning. There it was. He hid the flinch well, not well enough. How was she? Interesting. I used his word from childhood when he tried lying to Judith about broken windows. He smiled weakly. Interesting good or interesting not good? Interesting enough. He tried another angle. Victor says some mornings can look deceptively strong. I tapped the desk with one finger. Connor, how much does Harbor Trace actually cost? It was a straight question. The kind a father should be able to ask a son without entering moral weather. Connor did not answer straight. Why? Because guilt teaches you to notice avoidance long before evidence teaches you what avoidance means. Because I've paid over $500,000 in the last 4 years and apparently still need a translation guide for your invoices. That's not fair. It came too fast. That told me something too. What part? He looked toward the window, then back at me. The part where you make it sound like I've been cashing in on Mom being sick. There are lies that hide better inside outrage than softness. This was one of them. I said, then make it not sound that way. He stepped closer. You think I wanted any of this? No. That answer seemed to throw him. What? I think wanting has nothing to do with it anymore. We looked at each other across Judith's desk for a long second. Then he softened his face, used the voice, the son voice, the one from funerals and winter repairs and the day I got my first cardiac monitor. Dad, you're tired, you're angry, and Harbor Trace is not a simple place. Victor has told us from the beginning that grief can turn ordinary uncertainty into blame. There it was. He was already laying track, not for me, for the future record. grief, uncertainty, blame. I leaned back and said maybe. He relaxed a fraction. Bad move. Then I added, that's why lawyers like paper. His face did something small and involuntary before he got it back. Lawyers? Yes. Over what? I guess we'll find out. He stood very still, then nodded once. Okay, he said. If that's how you want to handle it, how I wanted to handle it. As if I had brought weather into the room rather than evidence. He left 3 minutes later after saying he loved me in a voice so practiced I could hear Brianna standing behind it in absentia. When the door shut, I sat there until the dark outside the window turned the chart glass into a mirror. Sad, not suspicious. That had been the strategy. The heartbreaking thing is how well it had worked. The useful thing is that once a strategy gets named, it starts losing power. At 9:15, Vera called. I read the emails. So did I. Good. Then here's where we are. I listened. Tomorrow morning we get Harbor Trace records. Tomorrow afternoon Darius starts tracing every related entity that touched your money. By tomorrow night I want an independent physician lined up for toxicology review and cognition assessment. We do not storm, we document. Then we decide whether emergency removal helps or hurts the larger proof sequence. I said, Judith told me not to explode either. Then marry her again in your heart and obey. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I looked around Judith's office, at the brass lamp, the pencil cup, the unopened April calendar, and the email printout that reduced me to a management mood. What if I've already waited too long? Vera was quiet for a moment. Then she said the most merciful thing anyone said to me that week. Martin, men like Connor and Victor survive on one belief above all others. They believe the person they are using will never fully wake up to the scale of the use. You are awake now. That matters more than when you should have woken. That got me through the night. Barely. Harbor Trace delivered the first records packet at 8:56 the next morning in the digital equivalent of a shrug. One secure link, 42 pages. Mostly summaries, mostly selected. Mostly designed, I suspect, by someone who hoped volume could pass for transparency. Vera printed everything anyway because she trusts paper more than screens and because paper makes dodging harder. By 9:30, 3 of us were standing around my kitchen table, while Darius marked financial lines in blue, Vera marked legal vulnerabilities in red, and I marked every phrase that sounded like a human being had been translated badly by a committee. The packet contained medication administration logs, behavior notes, a care plan summary, visitor schedules, physician review snippets, and monthly progress snapshots. What it did not contain was almost more useful. No raw nursing shift notes, no full vital sign charts, no external consultant reviews, no contemporaneous patient complaints, no family correspondence archive, no full informed consent sequence tied to later drug changes. Vera saw the omissions immediately. This is curated, meaning they gave us enough to say they complied and not enough to understand what they complied with. Darius pointed to the dosing schedule. Mornings are consistently lighter. I knew that already from Judith's hidden sheet, but seeing it in official Harbor Trace records made the whole thing uglier. There it was in their own lines. Medication A at 8, medication B as needed, sedative at 12:30 on most visit days, behavioral support medication at 1 during higher family contact windows, evening taper. Support, I muttered. Darius grunted. Criminals love abstract nouns. Vera turned pages. Then she found the progress notes. October year 1. Patient remains emotionally volatile when confronted with spousal identity cues. Recommend graduated reduction in husband-facing contact to prevent fixation spiral. January year 2. Patient better tolerates structured interactions when daughter-in-law mediates family framing. August year 2. Resident shows attachment to granddaughter stimulus. Limited supervised exposure may be used as motivational anchor contingent on behavioral stability. March year 3. Patient increasingly resistant to corrective narrative around incident responsibility. Continue redirection protocol. I put my finger on the words corrective narrative. What in God's name is corrective narrative? Vera's expression went cold. A phrase I very much want them to define under oath. There were more. Guilt maintenance. Protective discouragement of independent legal rumination. Environmental compliance targets. Capacity and consistency markers after high-emotion mornings. Judith had called it 3 cages. Medication, paper, fear. The records proved all 3. Then, buried on page 37 under visitor coordination notes, came the sentence that moved the room. Resident to remain unavailable between 11:45 and 2:30 on pre-cleared family days pending medication regularization. I read it twice. That was it. Not speculation, not memory. A standing block across the exact time Judith had told me mattered. Come before noon. My wife had given me the only safe window left in her own day. By 10:40, Vera had already drafted the next move. Formal supplemental demand, threat of court petition, request for raw nursing logs, full physician notes, consent trails, medication order changes, and all visitor limitation justifications. "We pressure now," she said. "How hard?" "Exactly hard enough that Victor and Harbor Trace start making choices under stress." Darius nodded without looking up from the bank traces, and stressed people reroute money badly. At 11:15, my phone lit up with Brianna's name. That alone told me Connor had told her about the lawyer reference and they had split into roles. Connor for wounded son, Brianna for strategic softness. I answered because avoiding them too much too early would only teach caution. "Martin," she said, with that gentle, smooth concern she always sounded like she had learned from magazine articles. "Connor said you're upset about the record situation." Upset. A useful word if you want to reduce moral injury to temperament. "I'm interested in the record situation," I said. A tiny silence. Then, of course, we all want what's best for Judith. No one says what's best for your wife like a person already dividing the furniture. I'm sure you do. Harbor Trace can look very clinical on paper. It doesn't always reflect the warmth of the actual care. I closed my eyes for 1 second and imagined throwing the phone into the fuel tank. What an elegant thing to say about sedatives. She went quiet. Only for a beat, then recovered. "I'm not sure what Connor told you, but if this is becoming adversarial..." "Becoming. Martin, please." There was the injured note. Not too much, just enough. "You know how complex grief can be." That was Brianna's version of Connor's line. Always the same tactic. Pathologize my perception before facts enter the room fully dressed. I said, "Funny thing about grief, it gets less complex when invoices and shell companies show up in the same folder." Nothing. Not even breathing for a second. Then she said, more carefully now, "I think before accusations start flying, everyone should sit down together. Victor included." Of course Victor included. She wanted the language machine in the room. "No," I said. "I think paper should sit first." That ended the call. At 11:43, Vera's supplemental demand went out. At 12:01, Harbor Trace's counsel requested a conference call. That made Vera smile in a way decent people should never ignore. The call happened at 1 with speakerphone on my table. Harbor Trace's attorney was a man named Colin Mercer who sounded like he moisturized professionally. He explained that my concerns were understandable, that Harbor Trace took resident dignity seriously, that selective misinterpretation of therapeutic terminology sometimes distressed families unfamiliar with advanced cognitive care frameworks. Vera let him speak for a full 2 minutes before she cut in. "Mr. Mercer, save your polished fog for someone whose billable hours benefit from weather. I have a resident communicating covertly to her husband that she is being misrepresented, a dosing schedule aligned to access restriction windows, a medical director with undisclosed financial ties to the residents, and preliminary evidence of payment routing through related family-controlled entities. You will produce the raw notes by 5, or I will go ask a judge how much privacy remains after apparent elder exploitation." Silence. Then Colin Mercer cleared his throat in the delicate manner of a man whose usual scripts had just been set on fire. "Miss Quinn, I think you may be dramatically overcharacterizing." "Excellent. Then the raw notes should rescue you." By 5, we had the raw notes. That is how truth often enters the room. Not because an institution suddenly finds its conscience, but because the right woman threatens it in the correct tense. The raw notes were worse, much worse. You learn something about people very quickly when you read the unedited version of what they think no outsider will see. Shift note, February year 2. Resident increasingly coherent before midday, questions placement rationale, requests access to husband and trust counsel. Dr. Sloan advised redirecting and documenting as perseveration. Shift note, July year 2. Family daughter-in-law prefers husband not informed of lucid morning intervals as he reads too much into them. Shift note, November year 2. Resident refused tea after asking whether sedation was being timed to calls. Brianna requested no notation of accusation in family-facing chart due to trigger risk. Shift note, April year 3. Resident completed financial calculations from memory and challenged statement about marina debt. Staff advised not to engage content and to notify Dr. Sloan if repeated. Shift note, September year 3. Resident calm during granddaughter visit until learning husband had not been told of her improved morning cognition. Escalation followed. Noon, medication administered early. I read that last line 3 times. Noon medication administered early because she was upset that I had not been told. Vera read over my shoulder. They punished clarity. Darius did not look up from the spreadsheet. No, they priced clarity. That might have been the truest sentence of the week. Further down in year 4 came a sequence of notes involving a staff member initialed MR. Documented 3 times that Judith's afternoon impairment seemed non-baseline relative to morning cognitive presentation, and once wrote, patient increasingly articulate regarding finances and appears aware of differential medication impact. After the 3rd such note, MR disappeared from the records. No termination note, no shift continuity, just gone. Who is MR? I asked. Vera was already looking. 1 staff roster page later, we had a name. Marisol Reyes. Licensed practical nurse. No longer employed at Harbor Trace as of 6 months ago. Vera looked at me. We find her. By 6:30 that evening, Vera had a town, a former address, and a cousin who owed her a favor left over from a zoning mess involving chickens and malice. At 7:10, we were driving north through marsh roads and stubborn twilight toward a rental duplex outside Denton where Marisol Reyes was supposedly staying with her sister while finishing paperwork for a hospital job in Delaware. I did not know what I expected. A whistleblower speech, maybe. A tearful confession. A woman shaking with moral injury and ready to deliver justice in a binder. What we found instead was a tired woman in scrub pants and socks answering the door with a spatula in one hand and distrust so visible it may as well have been name-tagged. Yes? Vera introduced herself first. Smart. Nobody should meet me first in a case like this because I look exactly like the wrong sort of trouble. Marisol's face changed at Judith's name. Not guilty, not surprised. Wary in the way decent people get when an old mess they walked away from turns out to have grown legs. We can't talk here, she said after 20 seconds. She took us to the tiny back patio where somebody had tried to grow tomatoes against a chain-link fence and been humbled by weather. She did not sit. I told them not to keep timing the meds that way, she said before we asked a proper question. There are moments when the whole night shifts in your favor with one sentence. That was one. I said, Judith knew. Marisol looked at me, really looked, then nodded once. She knew more than they liked. She talked for 40 minutes. Not dramatically, not in one heroic dump of outrage, just a nurse finally saying out loud the things she had been swallowing at work for too long. Harbor Trace, according to Marisol, began as a legitimate high-end memory residence with aggressive revenue goals and an obsession with family satisfaction optics. When Victor Sloan bought into the management structure through an investment vehicle, the place became more specialized, more expensive, and more comfortable, bending clinical language around affluent family problems. Not every resident, not every case. She was careful about that. I respected it. But Judith's case was different from the beginning. Victor gave unusual instructions. Family contact restrictions arrived earlier. Brianna's preferences carried more weight than ordinary relatives. Connor had office access he should not have had. Chart language around Judith's fixation on finances got stronger whenever she had a clearer morning. She was never like the others, Marisol said. What others? The real memory care residents, the ones who lost nouns and faces and the thread of a sentence because disease had taken it. Judith wasn't like that. She was angry. She was sharp. She repeated herself, yes, but around specific things. Money, signatures, your name, her granddaughter. She was not unraveling. She was being managed. My hands tightened around the cold patio rail. Why didn't you report it? She looked tired enough to collapse in place. To who? Victor signed the orders. Denise protected the floor optics. Administration loved the billing. Brianna called with family context whenever Judith pushed. Connor played devoted son. And when I pushed too hard, my supervisor told me some residents weaponize lucidity in fragmented windows to manipulate caregivers. Weaponize lucidity. I nearly laughed in her face from the obscenity of it. Marisol kept going. There was one day your wife recited every slip fee, fuel margin, and seasonal rent increase from memory after breakfast. I charted it because it mattered. Victor crossed the note out with red pen and wrote, isolated islands of numerical recall, not inconsistent with unstable cognition. After that, I started keeping my own notebook. That got everybody's attention. You still have it, Vera said. Marisol hesitated, then nodded. Not all of it. Enough. She went inside and came back with a slim, black composition notebook. Inside were copied medication times, observations, and side comments written in tiny compressed script. Not official records. Better in some ways. Honest notes written by a woman who knew the official ones were being curated. April 14th. J.H. calm, oriented, asked for husband and trust lawyer. Noon dose moved to 11:35 after call from B.H. June 2. B.H. requested extra sedation before donor family video. Said Martin reads hope where there isn't any. August 19. J.H. told granddaughter, I am not gone. Child began crying. Visit ended. Denise said not to include direct quote. January 7th, CH and VS in office after hours. Heard close the south yard before spring if old man stays soft. I stared at the January 7th note until the letters felt engraved. Old man, that was me too. Sad, not suspicious in the email. Old man staying soft in the office. Marisol watched my face and said quietly, "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry, that is a small sentence. People throw it around carelessly all the time. In the mouth of somebody who actually saw part of the machine and hated it, it lands differently." I nodded once. "Thank you." Vera asked the question that mattered most next. "If this turns public, will you swear to what you saw?" Marisol held the notebook against her chest. "If there is enough around it that they cannot say I imagined everything, yes, fair. More than fair." That night, when I finally got home, I sat in Judith's chair in the kitchen and spread the evidence in a line. The crossword, Judith's note card, the medication sheet from the false bottom, the Blue Water email printouts, the raw Harbor Trace notes, Marisol's copied observations, the county filing draft, the board ownership link, the bank traces, Connor's debt schedule. Taken one at a time, each thing was ugly. Taken together, they were architecture. That was when the next part became visible. Not just save Judith, not just expose Victor, not even just ruin Connor and Brianna, break the whole structure at a point where it could not spin itself back into a family tragedy with unfortunate misunderstandings. Which meant I needed two more things: independent medical confirmation, and whatever the hell they were trying to finalize fast enough that my records request had made Brianna call before lunch. The answer to the second thing arrived the next morning disguised as an invitation. Connor texted, "Brianna and I are meeting with Harbor Collaborative and Council Friday about the South Yard options. If you want to sit in, it might help settle your nerves about long-term planning." Settle your nerves. I showed it to Vera. She smiled without warmth. They're moving. On what? Whatever depended on you staying soft. By noon, Darius knew more. Harbor Collaborative was not a law firm. It was a redevelopment consortium fronting early-stage acquisition talks for mixed-use waterfront conversions. One of their preliminary draft site maps already included our South Yard, fuel dock relocation, and hospitality cottages along the very stretch Judith had protected in the trust because it funded winter maintenance through boring, reliable storage, not glamorous losses dressed as strategy. "They're not just developing around the marina," Darius said. "They're carving the living heart out of it." I stood very still, then asked the only practical question left. "How close?" Darius looked at the timeline. "Closer than they should be if Judith's capacity was in dispute and your owner authorization stayed active. Which means one of two things. Either they're bluffing momentum to create urgency, or they believe authority over the trust and land will be cleaner very soon." That brought us back to the draft capacity language. Power, paper, the shape of legal disappearance. Vera took off her glasses. "Martin, what?" "We are no longer just documenting abuse. We are racing an execution in loafers." For the first time in days, I smiled. Not because anything had improved, because Judith would have loved that sentence. The independent physician came in through the side door of my life 2 days later wearing a raincoat and the expression of a woman who had spent 20 years being disappointed by men with credentials. Dr. Eleanor Pike was a geriatric neuropsychiatrist out of Baltimore, though "out of" suggests she belonged anywhere except wherever fraud had made itself comfortable. Vera knew her from a guardianship battle 6 years earlier involving a charming surgeon, 3 forged consent forms, and a family who confused inheritance with triage. According to Vera, Eleanor Pike had once told a probate judge, in open court, that medical authority was too often just confidence wearing a stethoscope. I also liked her immediately. She read everything in silence at my kitchen table. Not quickly, not slowly either. The way people read when they already know paper can lie but still want to see exactly how. At the end, she rested both hands on Judith's medication sheet and asked, "Has anyone independent assessed her in the last 4 years? No. Has anyone independent even been permitted? Not that I know." She nodded once. Small, hard. "This is what long-form behavioral shaping looks like when a clinical environment gives it vocabulary," she said. "The medications alone do not prove exploitation. The timing does. The note language does. The access restrictions do. The selective documentation does. Together, they tell me someone has been using treatment architecture to create dependency and interpret that dependency as illness." I sat opposite her with my coffee untouched. "So if you saw Judith yourself, if I saw her unsedated in a protected morning window and she performed consistent orientation, memory retention, executive reasoning, and contextual recall at the level your nurse witness suggests, then Victor Sloane's long-term framing becomes professionally indefensible in ways I think he understands very well. Vera looked up. Could you say that in a sentence I can use on a man who still thinks emotional devastation counts as paperwork? Dr. Pike did not smile. I could say your wife may have been pharmacologically flattened into the very incapacity used to justify continued flattening. That sentence joined the architecture. The question became how to get Dr. Pike in front of Judith without triggering a move. We could petition immediately for emergency removal. Vera could probably get a hearing fast with what we had already built. But there were risks. Victor and Harbor Trace would see the filing. Connor and Brianna would see the filing. If they had any cleanup phase planned, they would trigger it. Move Judith to another residence. Rewrite chart language. Blame me. Blame Emma. Claim acute agitation. Claim spouse contamination. Claim grand mal family delusion if they could get the words aligned just right. Judith herself had warned against explosion, so we needed a lawful look that did not yet smell like attack. Eleanor Pike solved it the way smart people solve ugly puzzles. Insurance review, she said. Vera tilted her head. Explain. Harbor Trace is already adjusting or pretending to adjust care tiers. If counsel pushes on billing transparency and medication justification, it's plausible to request a peer review consult tied to reimbursement continuity. They won't like it, but they also won't be able to refuse easily without admitting the file cannot survive another physician's eyes, Darius said, and if Victor thinks the peer review can be managed. Then he will overperform confidence, Dr. Pike replied, which is my favorite kind of error. By noon, Vera had drafted the letter. Not accusatory, worse, professional. Given recent ambiguities in resident medication scheduling, billing characterization, and care tier continuity, my client requests an independent peer consultation to preserve reimbursement logic and avoid later dispute. There are few things institutions fear more than polite language that sounds reasonable to insurers. Harbor Trace stalled exactly 3 hours before agreeing to a narrow morning consult Monday at 9:30, with limited observational scope. Limited scope. Again, abstract nouns doing paid labor. We took it. Monday felt a decade away. In the meantime, the redevelopment pressure increased. Harbor Collaborative sent a glossy concept packet to my house Friday morning, not by email, by courier, heavy paper, aerial photos, blue and gold renderings, words like signature hospitality corridor and maritime luxury ecosystem. Somebody had already drawn our south yard as if it belonged to them. White cottages with metal roofs where the winter storage sheds stood, a restaurant deck where the bait shop sat. Private slips where local charter captains tied up every striped bass season. A lawn where kids learned knots on Tuesdays in June because Judith insisted the summer program should cost little enough that nobody had to choose between sailing and groceries. I took the packet to the marina office and spread it on Judith's desk. For 1 full minute, I could not do anything except stare at the drawing of an infinity edge pool placed where 3 generations of watermen had cleaned crab pots. That is the thing about predation dressed as development. It always looks peaceful on paper. White roofs, soft landscaping, people laughing into stemware where somebody else's life used to be. Connor arrived 20 minutes later. He saw the packet, saw my face, made the calculation. Thought you should at least see what the long-term vision looks like. Vision, I repeated. He nodded, stepping farther into the office. No commitments, just discussion. Harbor Collaborative wants flexibility. Brianna thinks if you can see the design, maybe it won't feel like destruction. There are sons who deserve patience and sons who deserve vocabulary thrown back at them until it cuts. I was not sure which room I was in anymore. What would your mother call this? I asked. Connor exhaled like an older man forced into a childish conversation. Dad, no. Use her words, not Brianna's, not yours, hers. He looked at the renderings, then away. She'd say you can't stop time. I laughed once, brief, ugly. No, I said. Judith would say anybody who calls demolition hospitality should be made to live in their own brochure. Connor's mouth tightened. You think I'm trying to erase her? I looked straight at him. Aren't you? He held my gaze longer than usual, then stepped around the desk and lowered his voice. We have debt, okay? There it was. Not confession, not enough, but crack. What debt? He rubbed the back of his neck like fatigue was the problem. The marina needs investment. The fuel system is aging. South Yard returns are pathetic. The insurance environment is worse every year. If we don't modernize, we'll get eaten alive in 10. By who? The market. There is no villain more convenient than the market. No hands, no face, no conscience. Just an invisible god cowards point to after they do what they wanted anyway. And this, I said, tapping the renderings, is modernization. It's survival. I let silence work. Connor filled it, as liars usually do when the right kind of quiet enters the room. Mom understood more of that than you think. No, I thought. Mom understood exactly this much, which is why she went to Vera before she ever came to me. Aloud, I said, "How much of your debt is personal?" That hit him. Not like a bullet, like a hammer into glass. Who told you that? Ah, nobody had denied the debt. He had only objected to how it had entered the room. I shrugged. The dumb old man move, the one Judith and Vera both knew I could perform when necessary. Paper talks. He stood there for a few seconds and then did something almost sad. He tried sincerity again. "Dad, I'm trying to build something strong enough to carry the family past you and me." Past you and me. As if he were offering legacy rather than liquidation. I said, "Then why does it smell like you built it on sedation?" That shut the office down. He stared at me. I stared back. The gulls outside carried on with the moral intelligence of gulls. Finally, Connor said, "I think Brianna's right. I think grief has made you take random pieces and build a monster." There it was. Back to grief. Always back to grief. Because if my perceptions could be emotional, theirs could remain strategic. I said, "Then the monster should die quickly under records review." He left without another word. At 5, Brianna emailed a Friday meeting agenda for Harbor Collaborative, South Yard repositioning session, preliminary authority alignment, transition structure discussion, protective family legacy language, protective family legacy language. I forwarded it to Vera with one line. "They think I still belong in the room they built for me." She replied 30 seconds later. "Good. Judith and I saw each other again Saturday morning. Not openly, not through official channels, not in any manner Harbor Trace would have approved, which made it the first decent thing about that building in years. Marisol set it up. She did not work there anymore, but people leave institutions and keep phone numbers, badge tricks, and knowledge of where cameras get lazy on weekends. One of the weekend aides owed her money and had no interest in Harbor Trace's moral framework as long as his cousin stayed out of debt collection trouble. That is another truth about big, ugly systems. They always pretend their power is total. In reality, half of it is held together by underpaid people and passwords shared on cigarette breaks. At 8:20 Saturday morning, I parked behind the landscaping shed while Marisol walked me through a service corridor that smelled like detergent and humiliation. Judith was waiting in a small therapy room with a half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the table. "Don't flatter yourself," she said the second she saw me. "The puzzle is for camouflage." "I would never assume your hobbies," she smiled, then looked at my face. The smile vanished. "You found more." "Yes. How bad?" Enough that Vera stopped using the word maybe. That was our version of panic. I sat across from her and laid out the update in clean sequence. The shell entities, the debt, Victor's silent share, the raw nursing notes, Marisol, the redevelopment packet, the phrase "sad, not suspicious" from Brianna's email, the old man staying soft note from Marisol's notebook, the Monday peer review plan with Dr. Pike. Judith listened without interrupting, which told me she was angrier than she looked. When I got to the renderings, she closed her eyes. They drew a pool where the pot shed stands. Yes, idiots, yes. Her eyes opened again, sharp as a blade left in snow. Then listen carefully, because if they are this close, the trust piece matters more than ever. She leaned forward. Our trust, as Judith reminded me, did not pass control of the marina cleanly to Connor on our incapacity the way he seemed to believe. Judith had changed the succession ladder 8 years earlier, after Connor signed an equipment loan without asking and nearly dragged us into an insurance breach. She never told him the full extent because, according to her, a man who confuses entitlement with leadership should not be given a roadmap. I could hear her saying that from beyond the grave, and she was not even dead. "Who's next after us?" I asked. "Not Connor." I sat very still. "What?" She nodded once. "It would have gone first into a stewardship arrangement with veto protections. Vera knows the outline. Local board, 2 external trustees, revenue lock on the marina land, Emma protected as beneficial heir later, but no immediate liquidation authority for Connor unless both of us signed off while competent." The air in the room changed again. Did he know? Bits, not structure. He knew enough to understand that if I stayed lucid and angry, the South Yard could never move fast enough for his debt. That mattered more than everything else for the motive line. Not greed alone. Deadline greed. Debt greed. The kind that does not just want inheritance eventually. It needs authority before interest compounds. I asked, "Did you tell Brianna?" Never directly, which means Connor either found references in the trust binders or Victor heard me mention trustee language during one of his condescending little orientation sessions and reported it. She rubbed her temple once. I tried to keep too much in my head when I first realized they were keeping me impaired on purpose. I thought if I just stayed clear long enough, I could outweight them. That was vanity. Even my vanity is organized, but it was still vanity. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. You lasted 4 years under sedation and performance pressure and still found a way to write in a crossword. I am not accepting self-critique from you today. That softened her. Only a little. Then I told her about Dr. Pike. Judith listened carefully. When I explained the peer review setup, she nodded. Good. Victor likes authority more than he likes caution. If he believes he can charm another physician, he will. That was the theory. It's not a theory. It's his religion. We had 32 minutes in that therapy room. Enough for evidence, not enough for grief. Still, grief leaked in anyway because that is what it does when love finds even a crack. At one point I asked the question I had been avoiding. Why didn't you hate me? Judith looked genuinely puzzled. For what? For believing them. For paying. For stepping back. Her face changed, not softened, clarified. Martin, I was furious with you. Those are not the same thing. I laughed. Then she did. And for 10 seconds the room stopped being a war zone and became what it used to be. Judith and me sitting over a puzzle, arguing honestly. She squeezed my fingers. You were the easiest one for them to move because your love goes straight through guilt. That is not a character flaw. It is just where they put the knife. If there is a sentence I will keep until I die, it is that one. Your love goes straight through guilt. That is where they put the knife. At 8:53, Marisol tapped the doorframe. Time. I stood. Judith stayed seated because if she stood too quickly after a clear conversation, the room might tip and the rest of the day would become a chemical argument. Monday, I said. Monday, she replied. I hesitated, then bent and kissed her forehead because old love, unlike institutional cruelty, does not need a care plan to know what it is doing. As I pulled back, she said, Martin. Yes. When this turns, do not let Connor make it about me forgiving him before the facts are public. I looked at her. He'll try. I know. Do you want to forgive him? Judith's answer came after a long pause. I want him to have no place left to stand while he asks. That, right there, was why we had been married 39 years. Not because Judith was hard, because she was precise. By the time Monday came, I had stopped mistaking adrenaline for readiness. They are not the same thing. Adrenaline is a match. Readiness is stacked wood. Dr. Pike arrived at Harbor Trace in a navy suit and a face so professionally neutral it made the reception art look emotional. Vera and I came separately. I waited in the parking lot because one of the conditions of the consult was limited family presence. Victor had insisted on that. Of course he had. He did not want my face in the room while another doctor looked at the wife he had been flattening by schedule. At 9:34, Dr. Pike went upstairs. At 9:47, Victor Sloan arrived. He had not been scheduled according to the official line, which meant he had been alerted privately, which meant Harbor Trace still believed discretion flowed upward toward the same people Judith had warned me about. Victor walked in carrying a slim leather portfolio and the kind of calm men cultivate when they think nobody has yet caught the motive hiding behind the medicine. At 10:28, Dr. Pike came back down. She did not stop at the desk, did not speak to Victor in the lobby, did not slow her pace until she reached my truck. Then she got in the passenger seat, closed the door, looked straight ahead, and said, Your wife is oriented to person, place, time, financial context, personal history, and current coercive circumstances with a level of sustained consistency that makes Victor Sloan's long-term framing look, at minimum, professionally grotesque. I gripped the steering wheel. At minimum, yes. What's the maximum? She turned toward me. At maximum, I believe he has participated in the maintenance of induced incapacity. There it was. Not just over-medication, not just mischaracterization, maintenance, an ongoing act. What did Judith say? Dr. Pike exhaled. She said, quote, If that man uses the phrase emotionally loaded familiarity one more time, I would like a medical exception for homicide. I closed my eyes, then laughed. Real laugh, too sharp, almost painful. Sounds right. Dr. Pike handed me a sealed envelope. Preliminary findings for Vera only until I finalize language, and Martin. Yes. I don't say this lightly. I would support emergency removal if necessary. Necessary. Everything about the next 48 hours turned on that word. Necessary, as it turned out, arrived in layers. The first layer came from Vera that same afternoon. She read Dr. Pike's preliminary findings twice, called one person in Annapolis, another in Centerville, and a third whose name she did not offer because, according to her, you do not flash every card in your hand just because the other side has started sweating. By Ford, we had 2 new people at my kitchen table. Assistant Attorney General Naomi Price and Detective Owen Bledsoe from the State Elder Exploitation Unit. Naomi Price had the kind of stillness that makes men either tell the truth faster or reveal what kind of fool they are by trying not to. Mid-40s, dark suit, not one unnecessary word, eyes that seemed to arrive in the room 3 seconds before the rest of her. Detective Bledsoe looked more like what people expect when they hear detective. Broad-shouldered, weathered face, no patience for performative outrage. He carried a legal pad already half filled before he sat down, which I took as a good sign. Men who write early usually know bad people say interesting things before they realize the room has changed. Naomi read the evidence packet in complete silence. No sympathetic noises, no gasps, nothing but pages turning, and once, very lightly, her nail tapping the phrase, "Patient remains highly responsive to corrective narrative around incident responsibility." When she finished, she folded her hands and said, "I have seen uglier. I have not seen many cleaner." That was the first time all week Hope showed up without costume. Bledsoe asked questions in a sequence that told me exactly how his mind worked. Who controls facility access on paper? Who benefits from prolonged placement? Who shaped the capacity language? Who stands to profit from land movement if incapacity remains credible? Who can get the wife out safely without tipping the son too early? Who is the grandchild with the crossword? That last one made me sit up straighter. Emma has done nothing wrong. Naomi's gaze moved to me. No one is suggesting she has. We need to understand every vector of leverage these people use. Children are often their most reliable one. She was right. I hated that she was right. That was becoming a theme. Dr. Pike laid out the medical side next. Judith, in her assessment, did not present as a woman in irreversible decline. She presented as a woman under medication shaping, narrative restriction, and prolonged environmental control, complicated by natural fatigue, emotional strain, and the after effects of years being treated like a story problem instead of a person. Naomi wrote that sentence down nearly word for word. Then came the question I had been expecting. "Do we move now?" I asked, "or build more?" Naomi looked at Vera. Vera looked at Dr. Pike. Dr. Pike looked at the medication chart. Bledsoe looked at the redevelopment packet. Then Naomi answered, "We do both if we can." She explained it like this. Immediate removal was possible, maybe even advisable on narrow medical ethics, but removal alone risked pushing the rest of the scheme into separate denials. Victor would claim clinical disagreement. Connor would claim overprotective intervention. Brianna would claim family panic. Harbor Trace would claim protocol. The land deal people would back out quietly and later pretend they had been nowhere near something improper. The money could still be traced, yes, but the emotional center of the case might fracture into paperwork and after-the-fact interpretation. "What would you rather have?" Naomi asked. A distressed son saying he trusted the wrong doctor, or that same son walking himself into a meeting where he tries to formalize the authority the doctor built for him. I did not answer because I knew the answer already. The second thing. Always the second thing. Naomi continued. "The redevelopment session Friday may be our hinge. If they are truly moving to convert your wife's so-called incapacity into land control and trust leverage, they will say things in that room they would never say in court. If we can lawfully monitor and document those things while simultaneously securing your wife's safety, we stop not only the medical exploitation, but the financial execution built on top of it." Vera leaned back. "There's our language. Financial execution." Because that was what it was. Not just abuse. Conversion. The point where a kept illness becomes an asset class. The outline formed fast after that. Naomi would open a confidential exploitation file under preliminary evidence of elder abuse, medical fraud, and financial coercion. Bledsoe would start discreet preservation requests and quiet subpoenas where possible. Darius would keep tracing the shell network and developer deposits. Vera would prepare an emergency protective petition for Judith and a civil freeze motion tied to trust and land authority, but hold filing until timing served the criminal spine. Dr. Pike wanted one thing in return for not moving Judith that night. Medication disruption protection, she said. If they suspect pressure and raise her afternoon dose, we're no longer talking about evidence strategy. We're talking about acute risk. Naomi nodded. That problem got solved in a way so bureaucratically elegant Judith would have admired it. The state issued a compliance hold tied to medication review after the peer consult, framed as temporary audit oversight pending billing clarification. Harbor Trace was required to notify the unit before altering Judith's medication schedule outside standing morning routine. They would not know the larger criminal file existed yet. They would only know state eyes had entered the chart. That, we hoped, would make Victor cautious without making him flee. The most satisfying part was how enraged he reportedly became on the phone when Harbor Trace informed him. Denise later told Marisol's old weekend contact that Victor used the phrase absurdly invasive oversight and hung up so hard a framed watercolor shifted. Good. I hoped it fell. That night, Vera and I sat at my kitchen table after everyone left and stared at the remains of the day. Coffee rings, legal pads, copies, Dr. Pike's sealed notes, Harbor Collaborative's glossy fantasies, Emma's crossword propped against the sugar bowl because I had stopped hiding the thing that saved us. "What does Judith want?" Vera asked. I knew what she meant. Not legally, personally. "Precision," I said. Vera nodded. "Same as always." We sat with that. Then she asked, "What do you want?" That took longer. For the last 4 years I had wanted Judith home. Before that I had wanted Connor honest. Before that I had wanted Brianna gone from my dock with her little tablet and her bigger plans. Before that I had wanted the marina to outlive me without becoming a brochure. But what did I want now? Not the soft answer. The real one. I want them caught in the exact place they felt safest. Vera smiled without showing teeth. There you are. The next morning Connor came to the marina before I did. That alone told me enough. He was never early without purpose. He liked arrival after other people had already started sweating. I found him in the bait shop by the old freezer, pretending to compare invoice sheets while really waiting for me. "Dad? Connor?" He looked tired, actually tired this time, which was new. Not because conscience had joined him, I don't think, more because pressure had started coming from directions he could not charm all at once. "What's going on?" he asked, at last, the direct question. Not because he wanted truth, because the room around him had changed and he did not yet know how much. "What do you mean?" "The records demand. State compliance calls to Harbor Trace. Brianna says you've involved outside people. Victor is furious." Victor being furious is not automatically a downside. Connor rubbed his jaw. "Dad, I'm trying not to read this as an attack." I unlocked the freezer, pulled out a case of mullet, and set it on the counter harder than necessary. "That's very generous." He waited. When I did not help him, he pressed. "You know what this does, right? To mom's care, to staff cooperation, to the trust everyone has been holding around a fragile situation." Trust everyone has been holding. Interesting choice. Trust as containment. I stacked bait trays because if I looked directly at my son for too long that morning, I might say the wrong excellent thing too early. "What fragile situation is that exactly?" He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Come on." "No. Explain it like I'm stupid." That landed. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Mom has been difficult, you know that." "No, I know what the charts call difficult. I'm interested in what you call it when a woman asks about her own money." He went still, then softer. "You talk to her. Interesting thing to say if she doesn't know me." Wrong move by him. He knew it too late. For half a second, his whole face opened, not with remorse, but with the awful dawning realization that the shape of the lie had shifted, and he had not been told which version I believed yet. Then he recovered. "Windows," he said. "Victor told us there could be windows. Then maybe Victor should bill by honesty instead of quarter." Connor stepped closer to the counter. "Dad, whatever you think is happening, Brianna and I have kept that place, this business, and your life from coming apart for 4 years. There it was, the martyr line. Always comes out when theft feels cornered. I looked at him. "No," I said. "You kept me functional enough to pay." He flinched, actual flinch this time. Then he did something unexpected. He got angry. Not performatively upset, not wounded son anger, real anger, fast and ugly and tired. You think you're the only one who lost something when she went down. That stopped me for a second, because it was the first true emotion I had heard from him in days. "What did you lose, Connor?" He looked toward the marina window, past the fuel dock, out toward the gray water, as if the water had better odds of agreeing with him. "I lost any chance to build this place into something that could survive you two treating it like a shrine. There are sons who say cruel things because they want to wound. Then there are sons who say cruel things because pressure has finally squeezed the dressing off an older belief. This was the second kind. "You think that was your loss," I said. He met my eyes. "Yes." The honesty of that hit harder than denial might have, because for one naked second I saw it. He really had been nursing that grievance. Not just money, not just Brianna, not just debt, resentment. Deep one, years old. The marina had not merely been a family business to Connor. It had become the stage on which he believed his talent was being underused by two sentimental people who could not think strategically. That made the rest uglier, not cleaner. He did not merely exploit Judith's collapse. He also believed some version of the exploitation was correction. I said, "Friday meeting, I'll be there." He looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes." Something hopeful and terrible passed through his face. "Good," he said. "Good, because if you actually sit through the full plan, I think you'll see Brianna and I are trying to protect what matters." Protect. Again and again they used the words belonging to caretakers while standing over a financial corpse. He left 5 minutes later, calmer than when he arrived, which meant he thought progress had been made. Good. Very good. By Thursday, Darius had enough on the money flow to map the core structure. Quarterly care wires from me, partial diversion through Connor-linked accounts in 2 cycles, consulting fees through Blue Water, hospitality bridge debt serviced indirectly by those movements, board silent share distributions to Victor's investment entity, Harbor Collaborative preliminary retainers, timed just after 2 of the largest care acceleration asks. And one especially beautiful piece of stupidity, Brianna had used a Blue Water reimbursement transfer to pay a deposit for design work on the Harbor Cottages concept packet. In short, the same river of money feeding Judith's captivity had watered the fantasy architecture they were trying to sell me on. Darius printed the flowchart on 11 by 17 paper and laid it out like a battlefield map. "This is the spine," he said. "Not every dollar is illegal by itself. That is not how people like this build. They use enough legitimate movement to warm the bloodstream, then stitch exploitation into the capillaries." I looked at the arrows. Can a jury understand this? Naomi, who had come by to review timing, said, "A jury does not need to understand all of it. They need to understand enough of it to know the care story paid for the land story." That, I thought, was one of the cleaner sentences I had ever heard. Thursday evening, Judith and I spoke by phone for 9 minutes. An official Harbor Trace check-in, monitored in theory, though Naomi had by then ensured the recording chain on our side was legal and complete. Judith sounded slower than in person, but far better than any call before the state compliance hold. No surprise there. Someone had taken Victor's toy away for 48 hours, and suddenly my wife sounded like my wife again. "How was the weather?" she asked. We had agreed on the code the night before through Vera. Weather meant the room. "Cloudy," I said. "Pressure dropping." "Still standing." That meant risk, increasing but contained. "And the marina still smells like bait and denial." That made her laugh softly. Then lower, she said, "Do not let him make Friday into a family reconciliation scene. He'll try. Of course he will. It's cheaper than accountability." There was movement on her line, an aide maybe, a cart, some institutional sound trying to sit where intimacy was. Judith continued in a normal voice. "Did you get the old chart from the desk?" "Yes. Good. Throw out the red pencils. They smear." Anyone listening would hear housekeeping. I heard that she knew I had been in her office and wanted me calm. Then she said quietly enough that I almost missed it. "Victor hates witnesses who can count." That mattered. Not new, but useful. Her mind was still indexing pressure points even from inside the place built to blur them. "I'll bring arithmetic," I said. She understood. "So do." When we hung up, I realized my hands were steadier than they had been in a week. Not because the danger had shrunk, because the ending had started choosing its shape. Friday began before dawn because betrayal, like fishing, likes men tired. At 5:10, Naomi called. "Judith is moving now." No drama in her voice, just fact. That was how I knew the machine had finally tipped our way. Under the sealed protective order Vera had prepared and Dr. Pike had medically supported, Judith was being transferred out of Harbor Trace for emergency independent stabilization and observation. The order did not yet announce the broader exploitation case to family. Harbor Trace was required to comply, preserve records, and refrain from non-clinical notification pending state review. Denise, I later learned, cried. Victor was not on site. Connor and Brianna would discover the transfer only when the meeting had already begun and the room had closed around them. That was not luck. That was Judith's revenge, showing early signs of muscle. I sat at my kitchen table, in the half-dark, with coffee I could not taste, and the marina's old brass tide clock ticking over the back door. The house felt too quiet without Judith in it, and too alive suddenly for the grief version of silence I had spent 4 years learning. At 6:00, Vera arrived in a charcoal suit and no patience. At 6:12, Bledsoe came by with the court-authorized monitoring order and final operational outline. At 6:25, Darius dropped off 2 binders, one labeled land, one labeled money. That alone almost made the morning worth it. The Friday meeting had been moved, at Brianna's suggestion, to the old sail loft conference room above the marina office. Neutral but meaningful, she had written in the email. That is the kind of phrase people use when they want to stage a takeover inside your own history. The sail loft had once held canvas, rigging, and winter odds and ends. Judith and I converted it into a meeting room 15 years earlier because local captains needed somewhere to argue about permits without scaring tourists in the bait shop. Long pine table, harbor charts framed on the walls. Old brass pulleys hung as decoration because I am sentimental, and Judith called it maritime self-respect. Windows looking east over the slips. I used to love that room. By Friday morning, I wanted it cleansed with fire and paperwork. Naomi's team had already placed the monitoring equipment under court authority through the marina office access I still controlled. No spy movie nonsense, just careful, lawful ugliness. One device in the wall sconce, one in the conference phone, one backup line through the adjoining records closet where Bledsoe and another investigator would sit once the room filled. Victor, Connor, and Brianna would believe I had come in tired, cornered, and maybe finally persuadable. For once in my life, looking tired was not acting. At 8:10, Emma called from school. Naomi had suggested I not answer anything unnecessary that morning. Vera had agreed. Both of them can go to hell on certain matters. I picked up. "Is Grandma safe?" Emma asked. No hello, no child nonsense, straight to the center. Yes. A breath came out of her so slowly I thought she might be crying silently into a dormitory pillow. Okay. That's all you need to carry today. I know. There was a pause. Then in Judith's exact tone, if Judith had once been 12 and furious at the universe, she said, "Make them stupid." I laughed despite myself. That is a very family thing to say. I learned from Grandma. Yes, you did. When I hung up, Vera was watching me from the counter. Better. She told me to make them stupid. Vera's mouth twitched. That child is going to bill in complete sentences by 20. At 9 WAD, I walked the docks. I had not done that properly in months. Not as owner, not as husband with a task. Just as a man letting his eyes touch the things he might otherwise lose if the wrong people ever finished what they had started. Slip 3, where Judith once stepped onto a deck in heels to help a bride's drunken father back from the edge of embarrassment. The fuel dock where Connor learned to pump diesel before he learned to shave properly. The weathered bench by the net shed where Emma caught her first spot and cried because she thought it looked disappointed in her. People talk about land and business as if they are simple nouns. They are not. Not if you have lived inside them. Then they become time-wearing boards and bolts. At 9:40, Connor's SUV pulled in, Brianna's sedan behind it. Then a black town car with Harbor Collaborative's principal, Simon Greer, a banking associate, and a woman from their legal team whose shoes cost more than my first outboard. At 9:47, Victor Sloan arrived, calm as a grave marker, leather portfolio, summer weight suit. A man who still believed language could outpace evidence if delivered with enough posture. He smiled at me in the parking lot like we were attending a memorial fundraiser instead of the preliminary disassembly of his life. "Martin," he said warmly, "thank you for agreeing to a constructive conversation." I looked at him and saw every afternoon he had helped erase. "You are welcome to every conversation you earn." The smile on his face held, the warmth in his eyes did not. Connor moved quickly into the space between us, always that instinct. Mediate, soften, control the temperature before truth finds a draft. "Let's just sit down," he said. "Nobody wants this to feel hostile." That word amused me. Hostile. As if hostility had only arrived once the man being robbed started asking for itemization. We went upstairs. The sail loft had been staged. Of course it had. Water pitchers, legal pads, printed site plans at every seat, coffee service from the good urn we only used during storm committee meetings and funerals. Brianna had even added white hydrangeas in a low bowl at the center of the table, which is exactly the kind of touch a woman adds when she wants a coup to feel tasteful. Connor took the seat on my right, Brianna on his right, Victor across from me. Simon Greer 2 seats down with his associate and counsel. At the far end sat a notary I recognized from county closings and a local trust attorney named Carl Wenner, who had once lost a permit dispute to Vera and apparently had not learned enough from the experience to avoid this room. That gave me real pleasure, because if Carl Wenner was in the room, then paperwork was already warm. This was not a feel-out session anymore. This was a structure session. Maybe not final signatures, but close enough to smell them. Good. Connor opened. "First, Dad, thank you for coming." No one ever says first unless there are going to be other equally manipulative things later. "I know the last week has felt charged," he continued. "Brianna and I asked everyone here because we think the best path now is clarity, not more confusion. Not fear, just clarity around the marina, around Mom's long-term care realities, and around how to protect what matters most. Protect what matters most. I wrote the phrase on the legal pad in front of me and drew one little box beside it the way Judith used to when a liar gifted her useful language. Simon Greer took over next. Clean voice, development hands, the kind of man who could say legacy preservation while imagining demolition costs in the same breath. Harbor Collaborative, he explained, saw extraordinary potential in the South Yard and adjacent marina frontage. Their proposal would honor working water heritage while unlocking premium hospitality value. Seasonal cottages, event lawn, refined fuel relocation, curated marine retail, community-facing waterfront access, which almost made me throw a stapler because the waterfront had already been community-facing, unless you count common men as a different species. All through his presentation, I made notes the way tired old men make notes. Slowly, with occasional sighs, as if age and grief had finally softened me into procedural listening. Inside, I was counting the seconds until people started telling the truth accidentally. Brianna stepped in when Simon finished the slides. "What we're really here to discuss," she said, "is how to align this opportunity with family stewardship in a way that relieves pressure on everyone." There it was. Relieves pressure. Not builds. Not grows. Relieves. Meaning there was already pressure somewhere else. She turned toward me with her best expression. Not daughter-in-law. Not adversary. Caretaker with unfortunate burdens. "Martin, no one is asking you to decide everything today. But with Judith's condition remaining complex and long-term care increasingly specialized, we have to be honest that the current arrangement is not sustainable." Current arrangement. I wrote that down too. Connor placed a hand near mine on the table, not touching. Near. Visual sonship. We want to protect Mom's dignity, your stability, and the marina's future at the same time. There is almost no moral filth that cannot be smuggled in under the word same. Carl Wenner slid a packet toward me. "Nothing binding unless and until you are comfortable," he said. That is lawyer language for there is absolutely something binding in here if you become tired enough at the right moment. I opened the packet. Temporary Operational Continuity Agreement. Trust Administration Contingency Rider. Conditional Development Option Framework. Medical Expenditure Security Alignment Schedule. That last one was impressive even by criminal standards. Medical Expenditure Security Alignment, $40,000 a quarter laundering into paper. I turned pages slowly. Connor spoke into the silence. "Dad, the trust language is just there because everyone knows Mom may not be able to engage capacity issues cleanly for a long while." May not be able. Interesting. Not definitely. Not legally declared. Just enough fog to move around. Victor finally entered. He did not look at me first. He looked at the documents, as men like him always do. He trusted paper more than faces. "Judith's presentation remains profoundly inconsistent," he said. "I wish I could offer a more hopeful trajectory, Martin. But part of my job is protecting families from false windows that create destructive expectations." False windows. I wrote that down in a box too. Then I asked my first real question. "How many false windows have you billed me for?" The room shifted. Not much, just enough. Victor answered with polished sadness. "That's not a medically meaningful way to understand the situation." "No," I said. "It's a financially meaningful one." Connor inhaled through his nose. Brianna adjusted one of the packets to buy time. Simon Greer suddenly found the harbor view compelling. Good. The lie had finally noticed money was in the room under hostile lighting. Brianna tried to reset. "What Martin means, I think, is he wants reassurance that Judith's care remains central." I looked at her. "No. What Martin means is Judith's care either remains central, or you people have been building a resort on top of my wife." No one answered. Victor lifted one hand in that maddening, tranquilizing gesture of his. This is precisely what grief can do when families are forced to hold ambiguity for too long. There it was. Grief again. He loved it the way magicians love sleeves. I leaned back and let my voice go almost soft. "Victor, if I ask you something very simple, will you answer it simply?" "I will answer it accurately." What a dangerous promise. He did not like that. I saw it, tiny movement at the corner of his mouth. Professionals who monetize mystique hate mockery because it returns them to scale. I said, "Is my wife capable of understanding where she is?" Victor paused just long enough for truth to leave the room and lie to put on its shoes. "In stable fragments, sometimes." Brianna nodded like that helped. Connor stared at the packet. I asked the next one. "Is she capable of understanding the marina?" Victor folded his hands. "She retains isolated islands of procedural and historical memory. That is not the same as executive capacity." Isolated islands. There was one of Marisol's phrases, cross-stitched now into this room. I wrote it down slowly where everyone could see me write it. Then I asked, "Is she capable of understanding that I'm her husband?" Victor's answer was almost beautiful in its dishonesty. She may recognize emotionally resonant familiarity in flashes. She cannot reliably metabolize the relational implications without destabilization. Simon Greer looked like he wanted to crawl under the hydrangeas. Excellent. I turned to Carl Wenner. And this level of answer was enough for you to begin capacity contingent land authority paperwork. Carl cleared his throat. My understanding is that all documentation here is preliminary. Based on what? He hesitated, looked at Victor, then at Connor, then at the packet. Based on family representations and clinical concern. Family representations and clinical concern. There it was. A grown lawyer confessing in nicer shoes that he had taken my son and a doctor at their word about my wife's legal diminishment while my signature still existed and my questions had been trained into sadness. Connor jumped back in. Dad, can we stop making this sound like some coordinated theft? There it was. Some coordinated theft. 3 useful words. I looked at him. You tell me, is it coordinated? Of course not. Then why does your mother's care money touch Brianna's brother's company? Silence, not abstract silence. Hit by a chair silence. Brianna's face did something I had been waiting to see all week. Not collapse, not panic. Calculation under real stress. Excuse me, she said. I took a printed flow sheet from my folder and slid it across the table toward her. There's the quarter in year 2. There's the routing. There's title hospitality advisory. There's Nathan. There's design deposit reimbursement linked to Harbor Collaborative Prep. Connor went white around the mouth. Simon Greer stopped pretending to be detached. Even Carl Wenner leaned forward because apparently outright numbers made this less like family sadness and more like career contamination. Brianna did not touch the paper. That's not what you think. Wonderful, I said. Then it should survive arithmetic. Victor intervened. Martin, if this meeting turns into accusation, I'm not sure it serves anyone. There it was again. Service. Always service. As if truth needed a permission slip from the people charging admission. What would serve me, I said, is one honest sentence from somebody at this table. Connor spoke first. We used some flexibility. Not no theft, not no routing. Flexibility. I almost admired it. Almost. We had timing issues, he continued faster now. Investor sequencing, temporary reimbursement gaps, consulting costs, nothing was being stolen. Darius's binder sat under my hand like a loaded answer. I did not use it yet. Instead, I asked, then why hide the shell structure? Connor turned to Brianna. Wrong move. Always wrong. Turning to your wife before answering your father about his own money is the kind of little body betrayal people think no one notices. Brianna answered for him. Because you and Judith had become impossible to discuss growth with unless every line item came wrapped in emotional theater. Well, there she was. Not the citrus-soft caretaker, the real machine. I sat very still. What a sentence, I said. Brianna's chin lifted. It's true. No, I said. It's useful to you. Not the same thing. Victor tried once more to lay a clinical blanket over the fire. Everyone here is under strain. Martin, you have to understand prolonged caregiver grief often. Do not say grief to me one more time unless you plan to invoice yourself for it. That shut even him up for half a beat. I could feel the room changing around us now. No longer a family alignment session. Not yet a collapse, but the pre-collapse pressure had entered. Everyone recalculating. Everyone deciding what version of the story still had daylight. Connor tried a new route, a more dangerous one because it sounded honest. Okay, he said. Fine. You want honesty. Here. He leaned forward. The marina could not stay the way it was and still carry all of us. There it was. The grievance dressed as practicality. You and Mom never had to worry about scale the way we do. You built in a different world. Insurance, regulations, shoreline compliance, debt markets, investor expectations. You think selling bait and winter slips forever was some kind of moral position. It wasn't. It was luck and timing and a generation that got to be local before everything got expensive. That, I thought, was probably the truest thing he believed, which made it more dangerous than a lie. He kept going. Brianna and I tried to build something bigger, something strong enough to survive the next 20 years. Every time Mom saw a new number, she treated it like a betrayal instead of adaptation. Across from us, Simon Greer went very still. He had come for a land discussion and found the emotional root system instead. Good. Let him hear it. I said, so when adaptation got difficult, you sedated the dissent. Connor slammed one palm on the table. I did not sedate anyone. Victor entered immediately, too quickly. Medication decisions were clinical. Too fast. Way too fast. The kind of response a man gives when he has already been arguing the line in his own head for weeks. I turned to him. Clinical for who? Victor's voice flattened. For a resident whose instability made ordinary contact dangerous, Brianna added, and whose financial fixations became destructive. There it was, financial fixations. A rich phrase when speaking about the woman who kept our books straighter than every man in that room combined. I said, interesting thing to call noticing fraud. The hydrangeas sat in the middle of the table like decorative witnesses. No one touched the coffee anymore. That was another good sign. When lies overheat, nobody drinks. I looked around the room slowly, letting each face feel seen. Then I said, let me ask one last question before anybody says the word legacy again. No one interrupted. What exactly did you people think was going to happen after I signed this? And that, finally, was the question that made them stupid. For a second, nobody spoke. That is the thing about the right question. It removes the comfort of slogans. No more stewardship, no more protection, no more grief and complexity and family pressure and adaptive growth. Just, what did you think happened after? Connor looked at Victor. Victor looked at Brianna. Brianna looked at the packet, the flow sheet, the lawyer, the developer, anywhere except me. Then Brianna answered first because Brianna always did best when speed could outrun conscience. We thought, she said carefully, that the family would stabilize around a structure that reflected reality. I laughed. Short, sharp, not kindly. Say it again without makeup. Her face hardened. Fine. She folded her hands on the table like a woman deciding elegance had stopped paying. We thought Judith was not coming back to full capacity. You were never going to modernize voluntarily. Connor was the only one with an actual future-facing plan, and if authority didn't shift soon, the marina would either stagnate or collapse under the weight of sentiment. There it was, the creed. Not tragedy, not mistake, ideology plus debt. I said, so the answer is you thought you'd wait until your mother was charted into legal fog, get me tired enough to sign and call it realism. Brianna did not blink. We thought resistance would look smaller over time. Smaller, not wrong. Smaller. I wrote that down. Connor flinched when he saw me write. Good. Victor stepped in again, but the old magic was gone now. The room had heard too many plain nouns. Martin, reducing a complex medical situation to a cynical financial theory may feel satisfying, but it ignores the reality that Judith's cognitive fluctuations were clinically significant from the beginning. I turned to him. And yet they always seemed most significant after lunch. Victor's jaw tightened. Medication timing is built around symptom profile. Funny symptom profile, I said. She's lucid enough to calculate marina debt before noon and confused enough to forget my face after tea. That landed hard. Carl Wenner finally spoke from the far end. I have to say, if there are undisclosed related party flows tied to care payments, I'm increasingly uncomfortable being in this room. I almost thanked him for discovering his spine in public. Simon Greer spoke next, and to his credit, he sounded less like a developer and more like a man suddenly aware his shoes were on evidence flooring. Connor, he said, is there something in the care financing we weren't informed about? Connor ran a hand over his mouth, bought time, then said the sentence that killed him. It wasn't supposed to look like this. Not it isn't true, not there's a misunderstanding, not the numbers are wrong. It wasn't supposed to look like this. I looked at Simon. There you go. Victor snapped before he could stop himself. This is exactly what happens when people without clinical training start interpreting fragments. People without clinical training. As if clinical training included shell companies and appraisal inflation. I slid Marisol's note copies across the table, then Dr. Pike's preliminary findings, then the raw Harbor Trace pages with early noon dosing, then the Brianna Nathan emails, one by one. No rush. Judith had always believed a table should learn the whole meal. Simon Greer took the papers first. Read, stopped, read again, passed them to his counsel, who read faster and paler. Victor looked at the pages and something truly precious happened. For the first time since I met him, he stopped sounding like the smartest man in the room. Those nursing notations are contextless, he said. Too quick, too thin. They cannot be interpreted outside treatment architecture. Treatment architecture, I repeated. Brianna murmured, Victor, too late. What a phrase, I said. Did you learn that before or after billing my wife's sedation into your investment property? That hit Simon Greer. He jerked his head up. Investment property. Darius's binder opened under my hand. I pulled out the ownership map and laid it beside the rest. Harbor Trace's parent structure, Victor's silent share path, Blue Water and title, Connor's routed care wires, Brianna's brother's link, the design deposit. Simon Greer's counsel swore under her breath. Quietly, professionally, still swore. Connor looked at Brianna then, not for help, for blame. That was new. Why did Nathan use that account? He hissed. There are few sweeter sounds on earth than conspirators beginning to audit each other too late. Brianna snapped back in a voice stripped clean of performance. Because you said your father never checked line item routing. There it was. Out in the open, my usefulness as an assumption. Connor stared at her. You said it was cleaner. It was cleaner until you started moving reimbursements like an amateur. Simon Greer stood up. I had been waiting for that too. Professionals from outside the family rot always reach a threshold where their own liability begins shouting louder than the meeting agenda. I think Harbor Collaborative is done here, he said. No, I replied before anyone else could speak. You're not. He looked at me. I beg your pardon. You came to formalize a land option predicated on my wife's diminished authority and my son's claimed operational transition. You will stay long enough to hear whether the foundation under that option was medical reality or privately priced incapacity. His counsel sat back down first. That told me which one in that pair could smell subpoenas faster. Victor tried once more to gather the room under his language. Martin, none of this changes the core truth that Judith has been unable to reliably manage the relational, financial, and emotional consequences of her condition. Condition, I said softly. You want to meet her current condition, he answered too quickly. That would be clinically irresponsible at this stage. Would it? Yes. Then it's a good thing clinical responsibility is not yours anymore. The door opened. No dramatic slam, no theatrical pause. Just the quiet sound of a door handle turning and a room discovering too late that reality had been walking toward it in sensible shoes. Judith came in wearing a navy coat, her own pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman who had finally been allowed to attend the meeting held about her life. Dr. Pike was beside her, Vera on the other side, Naomi Price 2 steps behind, Detective Bledsoe with a uniformed deputy in the hall beyond. Nobody in that room breathed correctly for at least 3 seconds. Connor stood halfway and sat back down like his body had forgotten which century it belonged to. Brianna went completely colorless. Victor did not. For the record, she said, this meeting is now part of an active elder exploitation and financial fraud inquiry. No one leaves. No one destroys anything. No one uses any device. The deputy in the doorway closed the distance by 1 pace. The room understood law had finished arriving. Victor still tried. Of course he did. Men who live by jargon rarely stop on the first floor. This is outrageous, he said. Any statement from Judith at this moment is compromised by stress, irregular transition, and obvious emotional contamination. Dr. Pike answered him before I could. No, she said. What's outrageous is that you spent 4 years mistaking a financially inconvenient woman for a cognitive concept. There it was. Doctor against doctor, no family grief fog to hide inside now. Just one clinician naming another man's work as rot. Victor's mouth opened. Judith cut across it. Victor, you have called my memory selective, perseverative, fragmented, and emotionally loaded. Let me help. On October 11th in year 1, you told Denise that if Martin saw me in the morning more than twice, he would stop paying before we had clean title pressure. On January 7th in year 3, you told Connor the South Yard had to close before spring if the old man stayed soft. Would you like me to continue, or are your notes finally catching up to your face? Victor went perfectly still. Bledsoe wrote that down, slowly, in front of everyone. Connor whispered, Mom. Judith turned to him then, and that was harder to watch than anything else in the room. Not because she was cruel, because she was exact. For 4 years, she said, I tried to decide whether what you did to me grew out of fear, greed, stupidity, or some talent for self-justification I failed to notice while packing your school lunches. Her voice did not shake. I have concluded it does not matter which came first. You fed all 4. Connor looked like somebody had opened him badly and left the room. I was trying to save it, he said. No, Judith replied. You were trying to own it before reality objected. That, I think, was the first sentence that truly broke him. Not because it was loud, because it was the one he had probably known was waiting for him somewhere, if she ever got enough clear air to speak uninterrupted. Brianna's turn came next. I refused to sit here and let everything get pinned on us when Victor controlled the medical side. That was not loyalty. That was triage. Naomi looked almost pleased. Thank you, she said. Brianna realized the error too late. I didn't mean... Oh, I know exactly what you meant. What followed was not a single grand confession. Those happened mostly in bad movies and nervous fantasies. What happened in our sail loft was something better. Fragmentation under pressure. Naomi asked one question at a time, not emotional ones, foundational ones. Who first raised the idea that Judith's afternoon presentation could support limited spousal access? Who decided family-facing notes should differ from raw chart notes? Who introduced Blue Water to care-related reimbursement timing? Who told Harbor Collaborative that operational authority would be cleaner soon? Who drafted the trust contingency rider? Who authorized language around Emma as a protected child variable? Each question hit a different weak seam, and the beautiful thing about a system built on coordinated manipulation is that once the seams stop trusting each other, the whole fabric begins pulling itself apart. Victor blamed family pressure and said he was trying to manage a difficult resident with complex psychological rigidity. Judith laughed in his face. Brianna blamed Victor's clinical framing and said she only ever tried to create stability. Naomi asked, with what money? Connor blamed debt pressure and claimed everyone had blurred lines because time and cost were bleeding them out. Darius slid him the debt summary and asked, is that before or after your wife routed design deposits through care-linked accounts? Simon Greer's counsel requested to place on record that Harbor Collaborative had no knowledge of any misconduct and relied in good faith on family and clinical representations. Judith looked at her and said, then I suggest your faith become more expensive. Even in catastrophe, she had range. Carl Wenner tried the narrow lawyer move. These documents were never fully executed, Vera answered. Conspiracy does not become innocence because the tablecloth got pulled before dessert. I may frame that sentence too. Then came the one moment I did not expect. Connor sat back down, put both hands flat on the table, and said very quietly, I didn't think it would go this far. Not a defense, not enough, but true in the pathetic way weak men tell truths when the stronger lies have all failed. Judith looked at him without mercy and without hatred either, which somehow made it worse. Yes, she said, that is how rot usually talks about itself in hindsight. Naomi signaled Bledsoe. The room changed again, final now. Bledsoe stood. The deputy stepped fully inside. Another investigator appeared in the doorway behind them with folders already marked. Connor Hale, Bledsoe said, you are being detained pending charges related to elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, and fraud. Brianna Hale, same. Victor Sloan, same with additional counts related to medical billing fraud and unlawful coercive treatment practices. Victor stood at once, not in panic, in indignation. That told me everything about him I still needed to know. This is preposterous, Naomi turned to him. No, doctor, preposterous was charging a husband to finance the pharmacological dimming of his wife while you bought yield in the building doing the dimming. That shut even him up. Connor looked at me then, finally, not at the papers, not at Brianna, not at the table, at me. The boy I raised was in there somewhere, the man who helped me winterize engines, the teenager who once cried because he backed a trailer into the old piling and thought he'd destroyed the world, the son who knew where Judith kept the spare dock keys and how I take my coffee. He was in there somewhere under debt and entitlement, and Brianna and Victor and 4 years of calling theft adaptation. Dad, he said, just that, one word. Same as Judith in room 12 when she had first tested whether my face still belonged to me. I did not answer immediately, because a father can love his son and still refuse to rescue him from the exact consequences he built to avoid. Finally I said, your mother's name is Judith. He looked confused. I continued. When this started, you all turned her into condition, resident, complexity, burden, care tier, and obstacle. I want you to hear her name in the room while the state takes your wrists. Maybe that was petty. If so, good. There are refined forms of pettiness that qualify as moral hygiene. Connor closed his eyes, then opened them again. Judith, he said. My wife did not answer him. Brianna did not ask for forgiveness. Interesting. She asked about Emma. What happens to Emma? There. Even then. The child entering as shield, as leverage, as costume. Naomi answered flatly. What happens to Emma no longer belongs to your strategy. Brianna cried then. Real or not, I could not tell. I also could not have cared less. Victor asked for counsel. Carl Wenner looked like he wanted witness protection from his own mourning. Simon Greer's counsel began making distance noises into her phone the second the deputy allowed device access under observation. Through all of it, Judith finally sat down, not dramatically, simply because the body still collects cost no matter how righteous the room becomes. I moved to her side. You all right? No, she said, but I am correct, which helps. That too I will keep forever. The arrests themselves were less theatrical than people imagine and more humiliating than they deserve. Hands behind backs, papers bagged, phones surrendered, Brianna's neat folder tabs suddenly pointless, Victor's leather portfolio taken by a man in county khaki gloves. Connor pausing at the doorway like maybe if he looked at the harbor long enough he could reverse time through eye contact. He could not. As they took him out, he looked back once more, at Judith this time. Mom, She stopped him with a sentence so calm it chilled the whole room. Do not make me hold your feelings while I am still getting my own life back. That was the last thing she said to him before the door closed. There is a kind of quiet that comes after law leaves with the right people. Not peace. Not relief exactly. More like the room taking inventory of what remains now that performance has been removed. The hydrangeas were still on the table. The renderings still glowed under the sail loft lights. The water pitchers sat half full as if any of this had ever been refreshment. Judith leaned back slowly and closed her eyes for 3 full seconds. Naomi said, softer now, "We can pause if needed." Judith opened her eyes. "No, I have postponed enough of my own life for this family." That was when Simon Greer, who had thus far been trying very hard to become furniture, stood and cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "for whatever it's worth, I had no understanding that the underlying family representation was—" "Corrupt," Judith supplied. He swallowed. "Yes." Judith looked at him, then at the renderings. "I believe you. Men like Connor and Brianna never lead with the whole stain. That is why they seek people fluent in partial truth." She pushed the top plan toward him with one finger. "Take your cottages and your pool and your maritime luxury ecosystem with you." To Simon's credit, he did not try to rescue the relationship. He just gathered his papers with the speed of a man who had suddenly discovered moral urgency in leaving. Carl Wenner left next after Vera informed him with a level of enjoyment I can still hear that she expected preservation of every draft, email, note, and billing sequence he had touched in relation to our trust. His face looked like a man realizing too late that the cheapest client in the room might turn out to be the most expensive memory. Once the outsiders were gone, the sail loft shrank back toward being ours. Just me, Judith, Vera, Naomi, Dr. Pike, Darius with his binders, Bledsoe in the doorway finishing paperwork. Judith put both palms flat on the table and said, "I want coffee that doesn't taste like policy." I said, "That I can do." So I went downstairs and made coffee in the marina office the way Judith liked it. Strong, no sugar, milk only if the day had been especially stupid. It had. When I came back up, she was standing by the east window looking out over the slips. Not crying, not trembling, just looking. I handed her the mug. She took it in both hands and breathed the steam once before sipping. Then she said very quietly, "They nearly got the south yard." "Not nearly enough." "I know." Naomi stepped closer. "Mrs. Hale, once you've rested, we need a formal statement. Not tonight if you can't, but soon." Judith nodded. "You'll have it. And medical transfer." Dr. Pike answered that one. "I've arranged admission to Shoreline Medical under my oversight for detoxification and stabilization. Short stay if all goes well. Longer if the taper proves ugly." Judith looked at me. "I do not want to go from one institution to another." "You won't," Dr. Pike said. "You'll go from a managed narrative to a monitored reality. The difference matters." Judith studied her for a second and then gave one short nod. That was effectively a coronation. At 1:10 in the afternoon, after the statement scheduling and protective logistics, and more signatures than any decent family should produce in a month, Emma arrived. Naomi had cleared it. Vera had insisted it be brief and gentle. I had not known if brief and gentle were even legal after what that child had carried. She came in wearing school uniform gray and the expression of somebody trying very hard to be taller than 12. Judith stood before Emma crossed the threshold. Emma stopped at the doorway like she had hit weather. "Hi, Grandma," she said. Judith did not go dramatic, thank God. Children deserve truth, not adult theater in their faces. She opened her arms. Emma crossed the room in 6 fast steps and disappeared into them. There are moments so clean you feel rude for witnessing them directly. That was one. I looked away toward the harbor long enough to let my throat work itself out in private. When I turned back, Emma was crying into Judith's coat and apologizing. Of course she was. Children handed unbearable truth always assume they delivered it badly. "I should have told Grandpa sooner," she said. Judith pulled back enough to see her face. "No. I should have." "No," Judith repeated, this time in the tone she used when elementary teachers tried to compliment Emma for being surprisingly advanced. "You did exactly what a child should do. You noticed. You told the truth. The adults were the ones late." Emma nodded through tears, then asked the most Emma question possible. "Can I keep the crossword copy when this is over?" Judith almost smiled. "No," she said, "but you may inherit it in due time." That was how our family sounded when love was working correctly. Judith went to Shoreline Medical that evening. I drove behind the ambulance because once you have spent 4 years being told your wife's access to you is medically complicated, following an ambulance down a coastal road with state paperwork in the glove box feels almost erotic in its simplicity. She stayed 9 days. The first 3 were ugly. Detoxification from prolonged sedative and behavioral suppressant misuse sounds clinical until you watch the body reject a schedule it was trained to obey. Sleep wrong, appetite wrong, headaches, rage, tremors, hours of crystalline lucidity followed by exhaustion so sudden it looked like grief had acquired physics. Dr. Pike was honest from the start. Your wife was not chemically annihilated, she told me on day 2. That is the mercy. She was chemically managed. Management can look cleaner, but it leaves behind a crueler argument afterward because everyone wants to debate what portion was the person and what portion was the drug. The answer always is both. We don't split souls with spreadsheets. I loved her a little for that. By day 4, Judith's mornings and afternoons began to resemble each other more. Not identical. She had been through 4 years of controlled dimming, not a bad week at a spa, but the cliff between who she was at 10 and who she was at 2 started shrinking. That mattered as much emotionally as it did medically, because every afternoon that failed to erase her became another nail in Victor's coffin. Connor and Brianna asked for contact within 48 hours of the arrests. Of course they did. Not direct contact at first, through counsel, through grief language, through concern, through deep remorse complicated by misunderstanding and family pain. Vera's response after consulting Judith fit on one line: no. That no did a lot of work. Not because forgiveness was impossible forever, because accountability cannot start with access to the same hearts you exploited. The public story broke 3 days later, not fully. Naomi kept the investigation tight, but enough got into local paper and regional trade press that the correct shape emerged. Prominent neurologist under investigation. Luxury memory residents tied to billing irregularities. Marina family dispute linked to elder exploitation probe. Waterfront development option frozen. Frozen. I slept a little better when that word started appearing in print. The marina itself turned into its own weather event. Locals brought casseroles because all American disasters eventually produce casseroles. Captains lingered longer at the fuel dock. Danny from repairs stopped asking whether I wanted help in the office and simply started doing the office things I kept forgetting to do. 3 slip renters quietly prepaid next season because, as one of them put it, nobody sells my damn dock to cottage people while I'm still alive. You learn in weeks like that what sort of place you actually built. Not the brochure. The allegiance. Harbor Trace tried the usual first steps. Internal review language. Commitment to resident dignity. Administrative leave for select personnel. Cooperation with authorities. No comment on pending matters. Then Marisol's notebook surfaced in subpoena sequence. Then Victor's ownership path. Then the discrepancy between family-facing and raw charts. Then the financial links. Then Dr. Pike's findings. Then Judith's own statement. After that, Harbor Trace stopped sounding wounded and started sounding insurable. Victor lost his medical privileges before the month ended. Temporary suspension at first. Then emergency action. The licensing board used longer words than I would have preferred and shorter words than he deserved, but the effect was the same. He stopped being a doctor in the ways that mattered to society, if not to his own ego. Brianna's family went quiet. Nathan Kessler, however, did not. Nathan hired 2 lawyers and then made the fatal error of believing accounting language could outrun Darius. It could not. Darius found enough crossing wires between Blue Water, title, harbor collaborative prep expenses, and Connor-linked care reimbursements to make even the tax people sit up straighter. Anytime you can get tax people emotionally interested, you know the fraud has matured. Judith came home to the house on day 10. There are returns, and then there are returns. This was neither triumphant nor easy. She walked slowly, needed rest, forgot small things occasionally, and hated herself for it until Dr. Pike nearly bit her head off with professional compassion. But she came home through her own front door, looked at the kitchen, the windows, the chipped blue bowl by the stove, and said, "Martin, the hydrangea on the back step is dead." I laughed so hard I had to hold the wall. "What? It's dead," she repeated. "We have all been having an ordeal, and that plant has still given up before I did." That was Judith. That was how I knew home had become an active tense again. Emma came down the following weekend, not for a dramatic reunion, for spaghetti, for the Saturday puzzle, for ordinary things made holy by return. Judith tired easily, so we learned new rhythms. Morning calls, afternoon quiet, evening short walks by the slips if the wind behaved. No discussing legal strategy at the dinner table unless something truly explosive entered. Vera ignored that rule twice in the first week because Vera believes dinner tables are wasted if they aren't occasionally used for war. The criminal case broadened faster than I expected. Bledsoe and Naomi built it in layers. Victor's medical misconduct, Harbor Trace's documentation manipulation, Connor and Brianna's financial exploitation, the trust and land authority scheme, the child leverage, the shell routes, the attempted conversion of Judith's so-called incapacity into development control. That last part mattered more than people outside the family understood at first. This was not just about hiding a wife in a good room and charging a husband for it. It was about using medication and narrative to hold the family's legal center in artificial fog long enough to seize the asset everyone knew Judith would block while lucid. When Naomi explained it to me in one of the many meetings that took over my spring, she said, "They were not waiting for your wife to disappear. They were manufacturing just enough disappearance to move paper." That, again, was architecture. The civil side moved too. The South Yard option died. Harbor Collaborative backed out so hard the tire marks were visible from space. Their counsel sent 3 letters emphasizing non-involvement and requesting assurances that no public statement from our side would suggest prior knowledge. Vera answered with one sentence that made me laugh until I coughed. "Then keep behaving like people who prefer innocence to convenience." The trust was secured under Judith and me jointly. Extra protections added. New independent trustees named, not because we expected to die tomorrow, because old love learns. Emma, at Judith's insistence, was eventually placed on the ladder not as leverage but as future stewardship, with conditions so strict that any descendant trying to turn the marina into a pool deck would have to outsmart 3 lawyers, 1 fisheries easement, and 2 community use locks. I called it the Never Again Clause. Vera called it civilized hostility. Judith called it housekeeping. Connor's lawyer reached out 3 separate times before indictment, asking whether Judith might consider a private family resolution path if restitution could be structured. That phrase should be illegal. Private family resolution path. Translation: can the people we nearly erased please solve this quietly so my client's future remains marketable? Judith's answer each time was the same. No. Not screamed, not theatrical. Just no. One evening, about 6 weeks after she came home, I found her in the marina office standing over the old chart and the stack of investor renderings we had kept for evidence copies. She had one hand on the desk and one on the chair back. "You all right?" "Thinking. Dangerous." She smiled faintly. "Yes." I walked over. "What about?" She tapped the top rendering. The pool over the pot shed, the cottages over the storage yard, the event lawn over our working dock. I keep asking myself where Connor crossed from wanting a different future into believing my present had to be medically blurred in order to reach it. That is not the sort of question you answer quickly if you have any decency. So I didn't. After a while I said, maybe he crossed it one small justified step at a time until the total looked too embarrassing to measure. Judith nodded. That's the most frightening answer.